And just like that, we're back and getting set for UFC 295. Prochazka taking on Teixeira, a big time card. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. And we are back in action, getting set for UFC 95. Thanks so much for tuning in. As always, one half of your hosting duo, Craig Allen, X, and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP. With me to my left, to your right, respective socials, Scotty Burns, it's Matt Allen at Matt Allen FNP. And Matt, I mean, when we look at this card, 2 title fights up at the top. It was announced on very, very late notice. It was October, near the end. Dana White coming out and saying that Jon Jones is injured himself in training with Don'Tale Mayes, and out is Jones versus Miocic. So all of a sudden, from the co-main event to the main event, Prochazka looking to win back the title that was his against one Alex Pereira. Pereira, from 2019 to 2023, this is a shot at a 4th title belt in 2 major promotions in 2 sports.
A newly minted Hall of Famer.
It's absolutely wild. Alex Pereira to the Glory Hall of Fame this past weekend. Prochazka back after the crazy shoulder woes that have kept him sidelined since he was due at UFC 282 last year. The co-main event, Sergei Pavlovich seemed like he was getting ready to be the alternate for that heavyweight title fight. Now Pavlovich going to be taking on Tom Aspinall. And for Aspinall's credit, I mean, he's got so many different layers to his game. They both really do, but you really do see a lot of finishes. 9 combined performance bonuses in that co-main event in their respective UFC fights. A lot of prospects on this card, a lot of second times out, and only 1 rookie debut, that of Peru's Kevin Borjas.
And we mentioned it the last time we did a breakdown for one of these pay-per-views. It is unfortunate that we've had 2 kind of rescheduled, very important co-main event, main event fights so recently, but what does the UFC do better than pretty much anybody? They're going to put together an interesting fight on short notice, and I gotta tell you, I'm excited for this Sergei Pavlovich versus Tom Aspinall fight. It's a fight that we're probably going to get anyways, right? Because both guys are so good, and if you stay around in the top 10 for long enough, Derek Lewis has proven it, right? You're going to fight everybody and start to lose to quite a few. But I'm really excited for that matchup. And I think that's a great fight to get thrown together on short notice. Is it the greatest heavyweight of all time versus arguably the greatest mixed martial artist of all time? Okay, maybe not. But it's 2 guys you could see maybe not reach those types of ceilings. But whoever wins this title could hold on to it for a very long time.
Very well could. 10 total ranked fighters on this card. And Matt, when we do look at the overall landscape of 2023, I've been going with the underdogs through the last couple of cards. And listen, you're still ahead by 1 pick. We tied last week. We've been absolutely on a heater. Retirement talk. It makes pressure, Matt. And what does pressure make?
We're like David Ortiz that last season where he just blasted doubles every at bat.
Making diamonds. So listen, Matt, we're hanging around till UFC 296. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. Question mark kicks. Listen, if there was one major takeaway from last weekend, if you steal copper out of the 5 wires, you're going to get yourself in some trouble. And ultimately, question mark kicks, it ended up getting screwed up because some people decided to do some illegal stuff. So hopefully this week, question mark kicks, it goes off without a hitch. But you can find us here on the channel 2 hours before to go over the week that was. And last week, it was a big deal because we had a lot of different weight misses, and ultimately, it ended up being a pretty cool card. So make sure you tune in for that. You can always find us at Fight Night Picks, X, and Instagram as well. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Couple of featherweights looking to kick things off in New York City. We have the hometown guy. It's Dennis the Great Buzukja looking for UFC win number 1 against the former RFA title challenger. I'm talking about Jamall, Emmers, and Matt. This is a fight that if you've been a long-time Fight Night Picks fan, going back to like 2018, you know that I can get amped up about a Jamall Emmers fight, specifically taking on a guy like Dennis Buzukja. Dennis Buzukja is a fighter that MMA fans, they knew and they loved since what? Dana White's Contender Series, 2020 when he took on Melzik Bogdasarian, loses that fight, wins a bunch of fights on the regional scene, comes back on Contender Series 2022, he gets a win on the season, but unfortunately for him against Calio Romero, he wasn't Joe Pyfer. That was week 1 of Contender Series last year. Buzukja gets a win, doesn't get a contract. Alessandro Costa on this card gets a win, doesn't get a contract. Not from Pennsylvania, close by though. But for Buzukja, he doesn't get it done. So what does he have to do? What does the guy do when he's down on his luck? Well, just like Joshua Dobbs, he gets to bounce around, fight with every different organization under the sun. Buzukja strings together 3 wins. He gets a short notice spot. He's the 4th guy to answer the phone against Sean Woodson not that long ago. Buzukja goes out there and rewarded for his efforts. He was outstruck 163 to 46, and he lost on all 3 judges' scorecards to the tune of 30-27. So for Buzukja, a full camp to get ready for an opponent. You get to get ready for another really long, rangy striker in this division. And when you look at a guy like Jamall Emmers, we talked about this at length. He was a guy years ago that we always used to make an example of. Who's the most well-rounded guy that comes to mind? And listen, it was tip of the tongue, the teeth, the lips. Jamall Emmers. Exactly. It really was for me. He's good at grappling offensively. He's good defensively, but vice versa with his striking. And does he have some losses that you look at? I struggle with that. And you go, okay, well, the Julian Rosa fight knocks him down in the first round. Yeah, Chumbawamba in the second round. He gets knocked down. He doesn't get back up again. And you look at the losses in the UFC, Jamall Emmers has fought a high-level competition. Sure. And the guys that he's lost to, apart from the one loss, they've been pretty darn close fights. And for Emmers, the other big thing about this, he's been matched up with some big fighters, and those fights have fallen out. I look at fights against Timur Valiev when he was close to the height of his powers. Now, you could say, well, in World Series he was there. Yeah, I'd agree with you, but a fight with Valiev was on the table, and also a fight against Movsar Evloev. So for Emmers, he had a long layoff at one point. He obviously got really hurt in the Pat Sabatini fight where the heel hook took his leg home with him. And Michael Bisping right after that was like, yeah, that's a long recovery time. You're darn tootin' it was. But for Emmers, the last couple of fights, one against allegedly a bad guy, Hussein Ashkabov, he absolutely dusted that young buck. And then his next time out, which was his last time out, and I'll throw the picture up there on the decision mat, against Jack Jenkins. That was one of the worst decisions of this year. It's a split decision loss for Jamall Emmers. I did think that he did enough to win 2 of the 3 rounds, but ultimately he ends up picking up a loss in that fight. So now, Emmers at 34. He's a gatekeeper to the 26-year-old Denis Buzukja, and I'll be interested to see what you think of this fight, because the last time I talked about Denis Buzukja in his debut, I was alone in August, Matt, wearing a Charlie Montoya jersey.
This is my big thing about Buzukja, and what he's going to really have to do well in this fight. When he uses his jab and that right front kick to his effectiveness, he can do a really good job of striking behind those 2 black lines. And I know that's not something we say often, right? Normally, that's the thing you never want to see people do. Get your back off the cage, but he can do a good job of moving his feet when he is able to land some of those longer range strikes down the middle, and that's what I do really like out of Buzukja. I love that front kick the front kick from the right side to the midsection. He does a really good job, and it's not only an attack to keep distance, it does seem to damage the opponent as well. It does kind of remind me of that Tony Ferguson-esque kick, and I think that's going to be a weapon that's really important. That's kind of a question that I've really been sitting on and thinking about a lot when it comes to this fight. If he does try to use those kicks to maintain that distance, just stay away from a guy like Emmers, who, again, not only is so well-rounded, but has those takedowns too. Do you think Emmers is going to go to just try to catch those kicks and go for early takedowns? Because at least in my mind, I think we are going to see a more wrestling-heavy version of Emmers, at least early in this fight, to try to close that distance and make it easier to land strikes as the fight goes on.
Well, I mean, Buzukja's a well-rounded guy. He's a brown belt in karate. Sure. That is the basis to it. But when you watch a lot of these Buzukja fights, and I went back, I watched his fight against Solsan Abanakov over there with CFFC, his fight against Valerio, who is out of, I believe it was the Philippines, over with UAE Warriors. In these fights, it's a lot of Rock'em Sock'em from a guy like Buzukja, and it really is a tale of his opponents going with long, rangy, straight shots, him kind of meeting them with the hooks, closing the distance. Buzukja, he's well-rounded enough, he has decent wrestling, but when it does come down to it, even in the fight against Valerio, I'm watching it, Valerio popping the jab out there. Buzukja meeting it with his face, he's got a bloody nose, and then all of a sudden he just bites down in the mouthpiece and he ends up finishing his opponent.
And that's what really is concerning when you watch the tape. I agree with you 100%. I guess I probably should have mentioned that, not just mention the long-range striking, but that's the frustrating thing. When he does decide to be disciplined with the striking, I think he can have great success, and even in a matchup like this, I think he could do a great job. But his tendency to take that half a step too far into the pocket and allow himself to get hit by some of those big shots, like Jamall Emmers lost that fight against Pat Sabatini, right? We all remember the injury. He also blasted Sabatini with a pretty big shot and had him hurt early on.
Well, man, hold on. It's not just any shot. He hit him with that big Marge Simpson
exactly.
uppercut.
And that's the thing about Emmers. I feel like every time we do mention Emmers, and it is the truth, right? He is so well-rounded, that's the thing you have to mention. But there are a few things that stand out, like the power when he is able to land some of those shots. And if Buzukja is not able to use his footwork, and if he does have a tendency to walk into the pocket, not only is it going to make him more susceptible to fight off some of those takedown attempts, and I think that's going to be difficult for him to do, at least sustain that throughout a lot of this fight. Because if Emmers does decide to wrestle a lot early, I think that is going to take a little bit of the pep out of Buzukja's step. And if that's the case, it'll probably make him tend to brawl a little bit more.
Well, the hometown guy going to be Denis Buzukja, training out of Longo and Weidman MMA over there in Long Island. And the last time that he even fought close to the New York area, it was back when he was the Ring of Combat champ in 2019, 2020, thereabouts, over in Atlantic City, New Jersey. A lot of different guys with Ring of Combat experience on this card, and 3 fighters out of that big time gym. You got Buzukja, you get Sadykhov, and you also have the knockout artist, Matt Frevola, who's got a big fight on this card.
Chris Weidman's getting a shout out in the crowd this weekend,
and
you know?
There's going to be like a long tier.
Frankie Edgar. I'm just trying to think about like other classic New York fighters.
If you do look at this matchup, Matt, Denis Buzukja, the underdog, he opened as such. He's still there. If you look at it for Jamall Emmers, favored to about a 3-1 clip. We have a look at the Topology votes, Matt. Surprised to us as they are to you. I'm going to say, just based on seeing the odds there, over under 75% Emmers.
I'll say over.
I'm going to say over. Oh my goodness. 1,037 total votes, 76% Emmers, 86% by decision. And again, the last time I did a Buzukja video, I was all on my lonesome. But going back and watching some of these Buzukja fights, you didn't see the second round against Romero. He struggles a little bit with the takedowns, but he's able to overcome. He's able to finish strong, get the things done in order to get the win. Obviously, it wasn't B. Joe Pyfer, but we've seen Buzukja rally in some of these fights, and even in his last fight against Sean Woodson, he gets taken down by Woodson. Like, he struggled in all aspects of the fight. He was able to up his output as the 3 rounds went on and up his strike percentage. Not that you want to look at numbers that bad, but again, a long-rangey striker. So I like the resolve out of a guy like Denis Buzukja, but I think he's going to struggle with Emmers, who's got such a bad taste in his mouth off that Jenkins loss.
100%. The only thing that does worry me is Emmers at 34. You could see this being a fight where it's kind of a hiccup, right? Where it's, do we have to start
like
worrying?
Timur Valiev started to have.
Yeah, exactly, 100%. There's a ton of fighters that come to mind, but the thing about Emmers is the talent has already been there, but by 34, you would have expected him to at least beaten some guys who at least were ranked and maybe be in that borderline of a rankings himself. I think the talent's there, and that's why I have him in this matchup. But for Emmers at this age, I do think it's kind of difficult to project a real good ceiling on him, right? Because he has had close fights against really talented fighters. He's had great performances against guys who are probably below him in the division. So for me, I just find it really difficult to say, hey, where does Jamall Emmers fit in the overall division? But I do have him to win this fight.
Some really interesting action at 145, going with the long rangy strikes, not volume, out of a guy like Jamall Emmers, but watch out for power. It's the great equalizer from Denis the Great Buzukja. Let us know down below in the comment section who you have in this matchup. 2 title fights up at the top, 1 interim, 1 for the real McCoy. You are not going to want to miss it. Keep locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Absolute banger coming up this weekend at flyweight. Originally supposed to be number 14, Steven Astroboy Erceg, moving up in the ranks to take on one Matt Schnell. Danger Schnell. It was announced on October 27th that out was Schnell, and the danger gets passed along to Alessandro Costa. And Matt, when we look at this card, there really is a lot of storylines as far as fighters who fought each other, who also featured on this one, as well as teammates. And if you look at it, Longo and Weidman MMA, they're represented by 3, and thrice represented is Lobo Gym MMA with Godinez, Costa, and Diego Lopes. But Matt, when I look at this fight, I mean, there's so many different things to say. For Steven Erceg, you got to back up the train to his decision win over number 10 ranked David Borshchev in a short notice UFC debut. Now, Erceg a couple weeks prior was supposed to be taking on Clayton Carpenter. The fight fell out, and he ultimately took that big time matchup against a ranked opponent. And son of a gun, something happened that doesn't happen very often for Erceg. Not only did he rally to win the second round, the third round, not only was he able to drop, and maybe they weren't counted as knockdowns, but you be the judge and go back and watch his opponent wobble. Erceg looked really good, but out of a decision win, he got a performance bonus. So something that we don't see very often, Erceg was able to utilize those good leg kicks that really did bust up an opposite stance of David Dvorak, that big-time right hand that we knew him for. But for Erceg, so exciting was he on the regional scene. We had a lot to say about him, the former Eternal Flyweight champion. I mean, if you know Steven Erceg, well, you probably do. I mean, it's not crazy and outside of the realm of possibility that you already recognize him because he fought with Hex. He's 7-0 with Eternal. He is their flyweight champ. A little bit of experience here and there at bantamweight. And I think the craziest thing out of Astro Boy's overall career is that already established as a pro, he somehow competes in amateur matches at GAMMA, the Global Mixed Martial Arts Organization tournament. And I'll throw it up there because in 2019, he goes through the tournament. At the end, he fights fellow UFC flyweight, now all of a sudden Denis Bondar, old psycho, and in that one Erceg loses. And if you go and you look at some of the pictures, I found one on Steven's Facebook page, they're wearing like the big gloves and they're wearing the shin pads as well, so it's not like we're going out there and landing elbows or anything crazy. So Steven doesn't get it done there, but that's all right, because that's a pretty darn good fighter. But as a pro for Erceg, I went down through and watched every single fight in meticulous order. And for me, it really surprised me. He's got 2 really big names on his pro record. 1 win over with Hex against the recent road to UFC finalist, and that is Sunguk Choi, who wasn't able to get it done over Park. And in that one, first round, fairly competitive. Round 2, round 3, it is Erceg taking it down to the mat and just controlling overall. And if you look at it for Erceg, when he wins his Eternal flyweight strap, he beat Shannon Ross, and he finishes him by rear naked choke, drops him with a right hand, and then gets down on the ground and gets that submission win. There's so many positives to go through it with Steven Erceg. He's going to be one of the biggest flyweights you're ever going to find at 5'9". But the craziest part about it, for as big and as muscular and as powerful as Erceg is with his takedowns, he marches guys down in almost a square stance. He drops back on the center line and drops his hands every time. And I can count it on 2 hands the amount of times Erceg's been dropped by right hands against his opponents. But by the jeepers, he's got 9 wins. And
he's one of those bend but don't break kind of guys. He's like the Colts defense when they had Peyton Manning. Because when Erceg is able to land his own strikes, and if you just watch them in a vacuum and kind of eliminate some of the strikes he's absorbing, he's not like a terrible striker. Like, he's not some negative striker on the feet.
Really, really good inside leg kick. He attacks the calf on the outside, too.
And a good right hand, too, and he's able to land it straight. He can land it as a hook, too. And that's why I do think he's a very dangerous fight.
Erceg will throw the jab out there a little bit. He will throw the leg kicks, as I had mentioned, and he will throw a really nice right cross, and every now and again he'll set himself up and wait and bait and then throw that nice left hook. You saw that when he fought Paul Loga in a fight where he fought Paul Loga twice. The first Loga fight, Loga goes overhand right and it lands on Steven's chin. He goes overhand right and it lands on Steven's chin. He does it 3 times. And Steven, bend but don't break, he stands up and then he ultimately lands that left hook. That is his only knockout win. So for me, Erceg's one of those guys, like we had Jesse Butler coming in on short notice last weekend against Jim Miller. I don't think Erceg's out like a fish out of water like Butler was against Miller.
Unless you're a top 15 fighter, you can't beat Jim Miller on 2 days' notice.
That was a Thursday call-in to fight on Saturday, and thank goodness for Butler, he made the weight, but I thought he was dead, and I yelled and woke up the dogs and my wife. But
like, Jim Miller's still that guy.
Yeah, when it comes down to this matchup, again, Erceg, he got dropped by Tim Moore. He got outstruck by Mark Familiari before he got the fight down to the mat. The fight that he had against Cody Haddon was at bantamweight after quite a bit of a time away. And in that one, even though Cody Haddon's 2-0, those 2 guys train together now, so that's pretty cool. Saw that on the Instagram of Erceg. But in that matchup, that was a fight of the night. It was back and forth. Haddon's really landing on Erceg. Erceg has to rally back again, and in the 3rd round, it really was all Erceg. I scored at 29-28 for Erceg. And then his last time out against Soichiro Hirai, familiar or kind of looked a lot like Dvorak on the outside. He's kind of lunging around. He is a southpaw. And then he tries to duck in for a punch. And as he ducks, then Steven's able to go in there, grab the back, pull the fight down to the mat. It was a bodyweight takedown. And Erceg gets the submission. So the counter right cross, if you know, you knew. And you saw it at use against Dvorak. But we saw it all the way through on the regional scene. Erceg in this one taking on Alessandro Costa. And Costa's one of those guys, Matt, you know, if I'm out there and I'm thinking, okay, how good is this prospect really? Well, last year we had a Contender Series show. We did all the episodes. We talked about the fighters. And Costa was one of the first fights on week 1, 2022. Again, he wasn't Joe Pyfer. He wasn't Dennis Buzukja. But he did get a win over one of those Flying Martinetti brothers. And he looked really good in that fight. I thought he was deserving of it. But listen, it wasn't Contender Series 2023 where you sign winners, losers,
everybody.
and one half of a fight that went to a draw. They signed one of the ladies, but not the other lady. But for Alessandro Costa, what does he do? He picks himself back up again. He takes on Carlos Gomez. He flurries a little bit. He lands a giant overhand right. It knocks out Gomez. And then Costa's in on short notice to take on Amir Albazi. Gets dropped twice in that fight. It was finished. But Costa's last time out, a bonus winning performance against the ghost of Jimmy Flick. He looked amazing in that one. And why? Because of his leg kicks, and he was able to drop Flick with the leg kicks and finish him up on the ground. So for Costa, coming off a performance bonus, and he got a finish for Erceg, a decision performance bonus. That never happens, but it did. I know you're excited about this. I think my face is probably Dana White, Conor McGregor press conference in Toronto levels of red. But listen, the reigning, defending 155-pound champion of the UFC. I'm excited about this one, Matt, and I hope the fans are too.
It is a phenomenal fight, and going back and watching the Costa tape, like, it's really exciting to watch because he does have so many pluses to his game. It's not only the speed, it's not only the power, he's got a pretty good ground game to go along with it, which is nice to see.
That's the best thing about this fight, and we'll talk about it.
Exactly.
We'll talk about it in the co-main event with Pavlovich and Aspinall having that kind of trap card that they're able to throw out. Erceg, you see it in his striking his last time out, but he's an excellent grappler. His wrestling's good in his jiu-jitsu. Alessandro Costa, while he's not the jiu-jitsu coach at Lobo Gym, that's Diego Lopes, he's got that BJJ black belt on lock.
This is one of like 2 fights in the card that I do know the odds of, and they're almost dead even, and it does make sense because guys' styles do complement each other so well. But we kind of talked a little bit before we started filming, and it was a point that we had both brought up where not only is speed going to be important, but Costa's one of these interesting strikers who he can kind of go from mode A to mode B, and they are a little bit different. There are positives to both, but when he has his feet moving, when he decides to throw his boxing combinations, he can do a really good job of not only throwing that one big right hand that can end the fight, but flurrying to close the distance. And I do think that helps him open up some of the grappling exchanges, some of the takedowns as well. But it does come down to, can he be busy enough on the initial flurries? Because if he does just decide to rush into the pocket over and over again and become a little bit predictable, listen, I was worried about Jailton Almeida's predictability. Didn't worry at all. It didn't matter whatsoever for him over the weekend. But for Costa, if he does get a little bit predictable going for some of those bigger shots on the feet, I could see him missing those and tend to wearing out. And that's a wild thing to say about flyweights too. We're talking about this fight like it's 2 185ers because they do have so many ways to finish the fight. But if Costa does find himself not using his feet and just whiffing on those big power shots, I could see it being a long night for him.
And for both guys, really good jab, really good leg kicks. I mean, Costa, it's the big overhand right. For Erceg, it really is the right cross to get over your defenses. And when you look at a guy like Costa, he always has to overcome the height and the reach disadvantage. And that might seem strange, but at flyweight, he is one of the more compact guys that you're going to find out there. And for Erceg, he's one of the taller, rangier guys. And that might sound strange because he only has 1 inch in a reach advantage. But watch the way that he fights. The one problem that Erceg can have, and you saw it on the regional scene, and you saw it in his fight against David Dvorak. Yes, he was able to land the head kick in the second round. He had the guillotine where it was almost like a Mike Goldberg, it is all over type of moment until Dvorak was able to kind of pull through. But when you look at a guy like Erceg, he doesn't cut the cage at all. He follows his opponent a lot, which is weird because usually fighters that have a good jab and a good leg kick, they're able to mold things into their own creation and back a fighter up and really pull away. So for Erceg, we'll see how that plays out in this one. The other part, again, the grappling, the wrestling on both of these men is that next level. And I was so excited to see Costa when I watched his tape to get ready for Contender Series. I thought, okay, this guy will be a ranked fighter in the UFC. I thought the same thing about Erceg getting ready for the Dvorak fight. So again, I think these two guys, they fit. Their styles complement each other. I see this as being a very, very close contest. We look over on Best Fight Odds.
It's one of those fights where we could see a rematch when they're both in the rankings. You know, we see like a 9 versus 10, one of those deals. Because I don't think both guys are going to be around for a while. They're very talented.
Erceg open -165. He's a -140 right now. Costa opened as a +135. He's a +115 or thereabouts. So we have a look at the Tapology votes. Matt, surprise dust there to you. I'm going to say Costa was almost a 3-1 favorite over Flick, and he won. And Erceg was a giant underdog against Dvorak, and he won. He got a bonus to his name. And the fans usually side that way. So I'm going to say over under 67.5% Erceg.
I've mentioned one of my friends in the lore of this show before. His name's Tim. I have another friend named Mike, and he was one of these guys who, if he showed up determined to be really good, he was one of the great athletes you'll ever see. But sometimes he just didn't really care, you know? For Erceg, there is a part of me, not about the care thing, but there's a part of me that thinks Erceg could, if he can continue to build on the skill set he has right now, could be a really interesting fighter. And the only other point I wanted to bring up was the fact that I agree with your point about the cage cutting. I think Costa's going to meet him, though, in a lot of these exchanges, so I just don't know if that's going to be as big of a factor, because I don't know if Costa's going to be the type of guy who does rely on the back foot. I think the votes are going to be over.
You think they're going to be over? And they are way over.
Wow.
702 total votes, 85% Erceg, 80% by decision for the 15% that have Costa, 44% by decision, 37% by knockout. And again, I think this is going to be a really close fight. In my head, I thought, hey, Brenner Krashowski's going to be a close fight, and it wasn't. But when you do look at this one, Matt, I really like to get your thought on just a pick here.
So all week long, I thought I was going to go with Costa, but I do think the overall forward pressure of Erceg at a certain point is going to catch him with a shot. I worry a little bit about those looping shots of Costa. And listen, if one of them lands, I'm going to look like the dumbest man alive, but I think Erceg can do a decent job, even though, and you bring up, rightfully so, the defensive liabilities he has shown with that technique. But I do think his pressure is eventually going to get to Costa, and he should be able to land one of those right hands. But I'm as excited for this fight on the feet as I am on the mat. And hopefully we do get some really fun grappling exchanges.
I mean, I mentioned in the original clip the fight against Paul Loga, who was able to land some shots. The fight against Cody Haddon, where Haddon had success in some of the grappling. And then, of course, he was just able to dust Soichiro Hirai before he came into the UFC. I'm going to go with Alessandro Costa as the underdog. I do think, again, for the size of him, he's got a long jab. And the big thing that I like at Costa in this fight is where Erceg can be kind of compact at times. This is the complete 180. This is a two-face if I've ever Aaron Eckhart something. As good as he can be with his distance, he can sometimes sit there and wait and try and figure out his counters. And Costa does a good job of ducking, but not like we talked about here a couple of weeks ago, ducking with his chin in. He doesn't do that like a Cowboy Fernandez who we saw last weekend. So I do like that out of Costa. He's in, he's out, he changes his levels really well. So for that reason, I like Costa. Matt, you're going with Steven Erceg. Really like to see if the fans like the guy that the UFC now calls Steve. It's Astro Boy Erceg. I'm going with no, Alessandro. Costa, Matt, some big time fights in this card. Listen, titles on the line. Co-main event, main event. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Flyweight action continues as the 2018 Great Flyweight Purge is years behind us at this point. We have some exciting prospects looking to duke it out in NYC at MSG. Joshua Van taking on the Black Rooster. It's Kevin Borjas, and I know you can get excited about this one. Yeah. These two guys absolutely breathe fire when they're inside of the cage, and it's crazy because for Joshua Van, he's 22 years old. What were you doing at 22? I was getting a university degree. This guy's getting a degree in thugonomics. I bet you a lot of old-timey fight fans would like that. But he is fearless. He made it near the top of the mountain with Fury FC. And then he ends up coming in, taking on, Matt, I'd say Kazakhstan's most eligible bachelor. Because when you got 1, you got 2, you got 3, you got more. Why not grab...
Shalgas, have you been around the block? Oh, I've circled it.
Listen, he runs the cement plant that makes the block. But when you do look at this one, Joshua Van, he was able to overcome a little bit of stalemate of the first round. He looked really good as that fight went on. Picked up UFC win number 1 against a gritty vet and a former Fight Nights global champ in Jaga Shumagulov. So for Van, he's riding that high. He gets to take on Contender Series 2023 winner Kevin Borjas, again, the Black Rooster. And when you look at a guy like Borjas, coming out of a country that's underrepresented in MMA, you think of Peru, you think of Daniel Marcos, you think of Claudio Poyes. There hasn't really been a lot of big-time fighters there, but a guy like Kevin Borjas gets that opportunity here this weekend. And if you watch his Contender Series fight, he was taking on Brazil's Victor Diaz. It was a short notice fight for both of them. Borjas was originally due Brazil's Rickson Zenadim. Zenadim is out, but he's always on Twitter. He was out of the fight. In was Diaz. Diaz was a massive favorite. Borjas, takedown defense like Swiss cheese, and you knew that if you watched any of his regional fights. Borjas was the Inca FC champ. He also had a fight in Copa Combate. You know, Camo McLaren just shouting at the top of his lungs about the biggest trophy in sports. But Kevin Borjas lost in that fight, and I'll talk about that fight because there could be parallels with this one. If you watched it, it's out there on YouTube. But for Borjas, the takedown defense it's bad. It's so bad. But when he is striking, he's utilizing those Muay Thai influences. That was his first martial art. This guy has the trickiest stance because he stands... It's a Thai stance, but it's a little square. He's got hips that, oh boy, are they ever flexible. And for Borjas, those leg kicks are insane, and he has got a cannon of a right hand. He can throw it as an overhand, a hook, but also, when you least expect it, he just leans back a little bit, pumps that right cross out there like a cannon. So again, I'm excited about this one. Both these guys are dynamic strikers, and I think it's going to be a really good fight.
It is a phenomenal fight stylistically because I do think both guys are going to be in the pocket for quite a bit, but that's the thing about a guy like Borjas, who is so comfortable just with that kind of lean back style, right? And it's something that we hate some fighters for. Luke Rockhold, he still does it in other combat sports now, but because it does leave you so open, right? If you don't move your feet and just relying on the lean back, all your opponent has to do is throw a couple strikes in combination, make sure they move their feet, and then they're going to be able to land much more consistently. But the threat of power coming back your way from Borjas, I do think does a really good job of at least keeping some fighters off of him. But I can't believe this is a conversation I had with another person today. I was watching Borjas fights at work, like you do, and my friend goes, so what's this guy good at? And I was like, well, he's pretty good at like being long away, but when guys get up close, they can mess him up. And he goes, you mean like a Greek phalanx? And I went, excuse me? I don't really know what that is. I think I've heard the term before. You know when like all the people in the military would put their shields together and have the spears going down the middle? His style is slightly reminiscent of that because at the long range is where the majority of the danger is going to be. But, and you bring it up, it's not only with the striking defense, it's the takedown defense that really does concern me. At the UFC level, I wonder if he is going to be able to get away with a style like that because under the threat of not only high level takedowns, but consistent takedowns that are really going to work your cardio, is that kind of a style going to work long term?
Both of these guys have those same kind of troubles in their armor, so to speak.
Guys when they get close, at least.
We were really excited about Van in his debut against Shumagulov, so let's throw it to a clip kind of before that debut. I really liked, again, this run that Joshua Van's gone on with Fury. All of his amateur and pro career with Fury FC. He has the one loss by submission to a really good prospect not that long ago, back in 2021 against Devon Jackson. But if you look at it for Van, this guy's really interesting. Now, when he's on the forefoot, does he throw a lot of combinations? Not really. He throws a lot of jabs. He'll throw a nice right hand. He has a really nice leg kick that wobbles some of his opponents. Going back and watching the tape on Van, though, I've seen people shout it from the rooftops on Twitter that Joshua Van is that guy. I don't know if he's that guy, guys. I really don't. I've watched so much friggin' fight tape to get ready for Zhumagulov fights. Van is last time out. He's taking on one 17-9 Cleveland McLean. 17-9's a great record. Cleveland McLean 17-9 isn't every 17-9.
At 21, though, when you're only 7-1, I think it is a good fight to have.
McLean wins the first round of that one, and Van rallies back, wins the second round. He ends up wobbling McLean. It looks like he breaks his nose because McLean's kind of pawing at it. Jumps from the back for the standing rear naked choke, and he gets the submission win. He's taken on Paris Moran before that, almost a year ago. In that one, Moran wins the first round, out-grapples Van. Moran's a striker, and then in the second round, it was a wild blitz of a finish by Joshua Van. The win before that over Mario Suazo, he ends up getting a calf slicer like he's Brett Johns, but he rallied back in that fight, and Souza was 2-1, and Souza's wins, the two wins, over an 0-1 fighter and an 0-5 fighter. And before those fights, Joshua Van's level competition, not great as a pro, but again, I get it. He is 21 years old now. He comes in as an amateur, as a pro, as a very young man. The skills off the charts, like if you just look at them on the paper, but it's really bringing them together in these fights. He can get pressured back and held against the cage. He's got a great move to get the underhook and shuck off his opponent. I really like that out of Joshua Van. He makes guys pay when it's on the ground. Again, I struggle with the fight IQ in some of these. He's a young guy. I get it. But Van's last time out against McLaren, he's in a really good position. And then all of a sudden he jumps down and goes for like a knee bar.
And he is much more submission over position. That'll be a big issue against
Standing to the leg, and then he gets back up and he finds himself back against the fence. And he smiles because he knows he made a mistake. And he is, again, 7-1. I'm nitpicking at this point. But it is tricky. I mean, he's a guy that'll walk out to Is You Ready by Migos. I don't like that song. They say "Is You Ready" so many times, and it's in too many commercials. So Van's able to get it done in that fight against Shumagula, but again, we were worried about his takedown defense. You think of that fight against Paris Moran, who's since gotten back to the top over with Fury. Van gets that win, first fighter to represent Myanmar and, of course, the United States, but first fighter of Burmese descent in the UFC, gets the win. Obviously, you got to be looking up to fighters like Aung Lang Sung over with one championship there, but for Van, a giant win. He's coming out of 4-ounce Fight Club, and unfortunately for Houston in the main event last weekend, Derek Lewis didn't fare all that well against Charlton Almeida, but Van looking to pick up the pieces and get the win over Borjas. I said about a loss, and you don't want to look too badly at a loss, but when you consider for a guy like Kevin Borjas, you add things up. Combined opponent record coming into the UFC for Borjas is 25-22 before he went into Dana White's Contender Series. And then he beat 11-2 Diaz. So ultimately it's 36-24. And that's with a loss to 13-6 Mendes. And so, listen, the wins are over less than stellar fighters. So he fights Renzo Mendes over with Combate. And in that fight, in the first minute, a counter right cross knocks down Mendes. And then he's on top. And Borjas is landing, and I'm not, you can't see because I'm below the table. But he's punching through the crotch of his opponent to blast him with ground and pound. Blasting him through the crotch with ground and pound. Borjas looks like he should have, that was like the biggest flash knockdown, and his opponent looked like he was out. Then he's beating on him through his crotch. And then ultimately Borjas wilts to the pressure, and he ends up losing against Mendes.
I don't know how to follow any of this up, Craig.
A really tough one.
He got blasted to the crotch.
The head kick wobbles Borjas in the second round, and then Borjas ends up the ground and pound TKO victory for his opponent. So again, Borjas, I worry about the takedown defense. I worry about kind of the stick-to-itiveness. I've seen him fight in 5-round fights before over with Inca. His last time out, his opponent retired with 2 seconds in the 4th round, which is a weird thing to see. But when you do look at a guy like Borjas or in Borjas, really good Muay Thai skills, really good counter-striking. His chin's been tested before. He reminds me a lot of Kyan Kraszowski, who fought last weekend. That's the second mention for him. But I am excited about this one, Matt, for Borjas to get that UFC
Even
debut.
he can't believe his name has come up twice this week.
Joshua Van, open to -250. He's still about there,
Decent
so he
size.
is the favorite. We have a look at the Topology votes. Matt, surprise to us there to you. I'm going to say over under 80% Van.
I think they're going to be over.
Van's the man, and yes, they're over. 1,091 total votes, 89% Van, 76% by decision. For the 11% that have Borjas, 70% by decision. Matt, I wore my glasses all day. I don't know how I'm reading this small print. I don't know if it's due in part to not a sponsor, Pitch Black Mountain Dew. I'm trash. I'm trash.
You're drinking like jet fuel right now, so...
You know what? It's kind of like that old Foreigner song, Dirty White Boy. I'm just drinking Pitch Black, and you better keep your daughter out of the
bag
picture.
of Doritos off screen. You can't see him.
Hardcore. I do have Joshua Van in this fight. Again, when it does come into those tight quarters, we've seen Van make some of those mistakes, either searching to drop levels, looking for some of the grappling in his own right. His takedown defense has been a problem as well, but he makes guys pay with his striking. Both these guys are very, very speedy. I just think there's more of a variety of attack from a guy like Joshua Van, and I think he's going to be able to get the win here.
And I think there's more threat of power from both sides, too. It's not only the right hand. He does a really good job with the left side attacks, too. Not only the hooks, he's got elbows in close. I just think he's a much more active and varied striker in that close range. But Borjas reminds me a little bit of like any late career NBA player, just a three-point shooter now. If they go off and if they're just able to do that one thing that they specialize in, they can look good. And I do worry a little bit that if he's able to land that right hand early and consistently, he's not going to need a crazy volume to win the fight. He's going to be able to land it, sit back for 45 seconds, a minute, land it again. And if he's able to use that kind of a game plan, I think he could win the fight, but I do have Van all in all.
Matt, it's kind of like John Morant taking on Steve Novak. For me, I'll go with Joshua Van in the matchup. You're in agreement in this one. Both of us going with Van to get the win. Some big-time fights in this card, Matt. Again, 2 title fights up at the top. Prochazka's back, and he's taking on Pereira. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Bantamweight fight is a Shark Tank and a couple of guys that are looking to continue to move up the ladder in the division. We have Minnesota's own Sexy Mexi John Castaneda. He's going to be taking on Busan, South Korea's Mr. Perfect Kyung Gong. And Matt, again, I said this at the start of the card about Jamall Emmers, but I'll say it about this fight as well. If you know me and you know this channel, I get too excited, frankly, about both of these fighters. I mean, for Kyung Gong, he debuted in the UFC. That's how excited I am. 10 years ago. Isn't that crazy?
Isn't it? Yeah.
10 years ago. He's the former Road FC champ. He debuts against Alex Caceres, and it's overturned to a no contest. It was a split decision loss, but Alex Caceres had a strong preponderance of the sticky icky left in his bloodstream. So unfortunately for him, it's a no contest. Obviously, that wouldn't happen in the year of our Lord 2023. But
imagine if that's what the 30 for 30 about Mark McGuire and Sammy Sosa was. They're getting dirt in the clubhouse. Can't be having it.
Wild. But Kyung Gong loses that. He loses to Chico Camus. But since then, Matt, Kyung Gong's turned on a pretty darn
Which
good,
is crazy,
yet slightly forgettable UFC run. And that's what I'm all about. Guys like Leo Santos, Kyung Gong, Claudio Silva, that have these insane records, but nobody ever talks about them. So for Gong, if you look at it, the 5 on in, he's 4-1. The one loss, you worry about it. He drops Ronnie Yaya early, and he just kind of blows his load in the first round, and he's a little bit sleepy round 2, round 3. The conditioning didn't hold up, but you look at the last 2 wins for Gong. He beats Bakary Dana, and he beats Christian Quinones. And in these Gong fights, I mean, I don't want to look at the odds too much, or I don't try to look at the odds too much, but they're usually really close in his fights because what do most people think about Kyung Gong? Well, he's really long.
He's really strong, too.
He's really rangy for this division. He's a really good offensive grappler. Defensively, he leaves a little bit to be desired, and that's why he tends to lose some of his fights. If he's not a better wrestler, then if you're like an X-Factor wrestler, you can beat him. But for Kyung Gong, he is really good. He can get held down. But what we've seen in these last 2 fights, Bakary Dana, who had just lost a few months before against Chris Gutierrez, got viciously finished in that one and took the fight against Gong. Gong was able to outstrike him pretty handily. And in Gong's last fight, you'll look at the result, you'll see a knockdown, you'll see a submission win for Gong. But if you didn't actually watch the fight, you wouldn't realize that Quinones was pushing a pace. He was landing some big shots. Gong gets backed up. He's behind the black line. He's getting hit. It looks like it could be to a point where it's going to be over. Then it becomes Rock'em Sock'em. And for a long-rangey striker in Gong, he starts to throw these big hooks. It's 1, 2, 3 hooks. Left hook, right hook, left hook. Drops Quinones. And then he gets his back. He gets a disgusting rear naked choke. Tight. He gets the win. He's so happy. He's pointing everywhere. They don't give him bonus money, so it hurt my heart a little bit seeing that. But Kyung Gong, we've seen a progression in his boxing skills his last 2 fights, and now you're taking on a southpaw who's got really good side-to-side movement, who was a really good wrestler before he became a mixed martial artist in John Castaneda. So style for style, this is one of the more competitive fights on this card.
It's a really fun fight, and I agree with everything you said, but I also think that Kyung Gong has this really weird part to his game where if he does go back to the fighter he was before these improvements, I do think stylistically at least, don't get rid of the things that you've got better at, but I do think if he went back to more of a wrestling heavy game plan, it would give him a good chance to win this, and I only say it for this reason. I know when you bring it up, you might think, hey, the submissions of Castaneda, like, he has a lot to deal with on the mat. He's been able to show that in the UFC tenure. I think that might be able to at least wear down Castaneda to make the power less of a threat as this fight continues, because if Kyung Gong is able to use his just reach and some of those longer range attacks, I think he could have success, but it's also going to leave that door open for him to get caught, and that's the one thing I do worry about, because he sometimes has a bit of a long reach chamber on his strikes. We'll throw that really nice shot, but he'll stick around for that extra half second and not bring the hand right up defensively, and it's one of those attacks where if he doesn't land consistently on Castaneda and the Sexy Mexi is able to just get his defensive down left to right, I think it could make him pay for some of those counters. But again, it's one of those fights where both guys have so many positives to their game, and they both have a couple negatives you can pick at here and there, but they're both really talented fighters, and that's been the crazy thing about Kyung Gong. He's 36 years old. I feel like every time we've talked about him, he's been 36 years old. He just always feels like he's in that kind of late prime, if you will. But like you said, not only has he been able to go out there and not look like a diminished version of himself, he's been able to make improvements amongst these last few fights, and how many guys can we say that about at this stage of their career? We're not looking around that saying it every week.
And both of these guys, I mean, it is a little bit strange because they both had gut check type of fights. I mentioned Kyung Gong's fight against Ronnie Yaya where round 2, round 3, he was underwater. Like, any round 2, round 3 in a Cody Brundage fight. But if you do look at John Castaneda, same thing happened when he took on Daniel Willy Cat Santos. He looks amazing in the first round, dropping him. And then in the second round, he's got nothing left. You see Willy Cat going in. He gets the finish. But again, Castaneda, you see an interview that he did with the All-Star MMA, JHK. He's got a new boxing coach. He's training at the Academy in Minnesota. He's a Mankato guy. Shout out to those hockey players up there, Matt. But when you do look at it for Castaneda, UFC debut, he's taking on Nathaniel Wood on short notice. 3:30-27s, he got completely outstruck, but even if you go back and you watch that fight, he hung in there. It wasn't that bad. He goes out there, he gets a couple of really big wins. Eddie Wineland, Miles Johnson, his last time out, he beats Muin Gafurov. He drops him in the first round. He puts a pace on him. But the big thing out of Castaneda, tricky southpaw, he will switch his stances a little bit too, but on the reset, it's like, wait. And I thought, in my mind's eye, that Castaneda watching the fights, before I watched the fights, I thought Castaneda, he does a lot more than Kyung Ho Gong. Rewatching the fights, sometimes he does. Sometimes we're fighting in a mirror. So that's why, as excited as I might be about this fight, it might end up being, we're staring in the mirror. What are we wearing today?
And that's the negative I bring up when I think about Castaneda. He will let guys get close to him. Be like Chael Sonnen, Vanderlei. I can't let you get close. Now, even though he does have such great offensive grappling, not only with the wrestling, the submissions as well, his long-range striking is very good when he's able to land from both sides.
Really good kicks.
Exactly. It's just when guys are able to get into that middle range, disrupt some of the kicks, and land their own offense, he will become a much more diminished version. And sometimes he'll even have this ability where he'll kind of push his butt out, put his shoulders up, almost expecting a takedown. It does open him up for counter shots on the outside when he does get into that kind of a mode.
Again, he's working with a new boxing coach. We'll see how that plays out for him. Castaneda is the favorite in the fight, open about a -155. He's still there. Kyung Ho Gong a +130 or thereabouts. We have a look at the Tapology votes, Matt. Usually people go with the fighter that's 5 years younger. I'm going to say the fans are going with John Castaneda at bantamweight. I'm going to say over under 75% Castaneda. How about them apples?
To me, it's a hard one, because I think Castaneda has the higher ceiling, but he probably has the lower floor, too, if everything goes wrong. So I'll say under.
You're going to say under? It's under. You looked at these.
I did not.
964. Whoa! I just realized the numbers, Matt. 964 total votes. 63% Gong. 81% by decision for the 37% that have Castaneda. 75% by decision. So the fans have are different than my brain and my mouth had. So I guess I'm in a state of shock. What's your pick here?
So I guess I'm going to go against the Tapology voters. Kyung Ho Kong has a great opportunity to win this fight based on the skill set. But, and you kind of bring it up, and this isn't all of what my pick goes into, I just worry about his age at this stage. Like, at the weight class, we don't see a lot of people in their late 30s excel at bantamweight. It'll happen every now and then. But look at poor Uriah Faber. He beat Ricky Simone, and then it didn't go great. So I think Kang has all the skills to go out there and win. I think he has to really try to close the distance, though, and that's the thing I'm going to be watching for. So I'm going to go with Castaneda ever so slightly, but I think distance management for both fighters is going to be the most important thing.
So this is really hard because I try and do the, I start this video off and I say, listen, I'm really excited about it. I love these two guys' fight styles. And obviously I'm not lying about that, but you try and keep the bias at the door at the end of the day. I want to take Kyung Ho Gong in this fight, but there's two fights that he's had that make me worry about it. One against Liu Pingyuan. He wins it by split decision. Go back and look at his face at the end of it. He looks like, early mask stage Jacques Plante. His face is blown right up at his nose. And then from 2019 to 21, he took time off due to injuries and he got married. From 2014 to 2018, he took it off. It was mandatory military service in South Korea. So those are the reasons for those really long layoffs. I think Castaneda will be able to bust him up a little bit, and that'll cause him some issues. I think Castaneda's got a decent chin as compared to some of the other opponents. So I'll go with Castaneda ever so slightly in this fight, but I'm really eager to see who the fans have because the odds, the Tapology votes, our picks, none of them gel together. So I'd really like to hear from you. Some big-time fights on this card. Of course, Prochazka taking on Pereira in that main event. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say. Let's get into it. Late week grinders touching down in New York City. We have the 2016 Greco-Roman Danish silver medalist Mark, the Olympian Madsen, and he's going to be taking on Flash Jared Gordon. Jared Gordon out of Queens, New York, and he's looking to get back in the win column. Obviously, for Gordon, his last couple of timeouts, they really haven't gone his way. And for Mark Madsen, he tasted defeat for the first time in his pro career. I mean, both guys, listen, they've struggled against Grant Dawson, but ultimately, it really is a bit of a clash of styles. You look at a guy like Mark Madsen, and the Greco-Roman, it'll take you far. And it has so far until his last time out with the grappling didn't matter. It was like, whose line is it anyways? The grappling doesn't matter, and the striking's not good. So what did we have? Well, Grant Dawson was able to soften up Mark Madsen with kicks. He dropped him with leg kicks, and then he was able to finish the fight on the mat in that third round. So for Madsen, if you look at it, he's really switched things up, and that's been the thing for Madsen. His thirst for knowledge. Even as a guy that's 39, it's always been there. You think about it. He's almost to his 32nd birthday. He's 31, and he wins an Olympic medal back in 2016. He's 39 now. He started training at home in Europe. Then he moved it to Extreme Couture. From Extreme Couture to his last number of fights at Fight Ready down in Arizona. Now for this one, if you look at it on the IG, he's balanced it out between Morocco, training with Nasrat Hakparas, but also back home, and you'll see that on the second, I was going to say slide, like it's a presentation, but you see it on the second graphic to where he's training his Muay Thai at home in Denmark. He's got a guy in Damir Hadzovic that's really going to help him with his striking.
I think so,
if
yeah.
Damir knows anything, it's striking, and if Mark knows anything, it's grappling, and if you put those two guys together, maybe that's a
big business
champion, I guess. But when you do look at this fight, Matt, Jared Gordon's kind of had a wild run. It's bumps and bruises against some pretty good fighters. And if you look at the last two fights, you look at the Paddy Pimblett loss, and I'll throw the graphic up there. MMA decisions, Matt. Not a single person, except for one. Dan Urban. If I'm not mistaken, Dan, you're from Couchside Judges. You're the only one out of the media members that scored that one for Pimblett. Pimblett gets the win over Gordon. Everybody had Gordon. So Gordon's last time out, he took on Bobby Green. Bobby Green's beating him up. They clash heads. Bobby Green then drops him. And then it's a TKO win. And then automatically it's overturned to a no contest due to the clash of heads. But it was an awful scene in that one. It really was. And then, a month and a half later, they book him against Jim Miller. So Jared Gordon gets a new deal with the UFC and also a chance to fight Jim Miller. He's out of that fight because, of course, he is. Jesse Butler steps in and gets vaporized. And now, so Jared Gordon gets all this time off. He gets to take on Madsen. He's got good jiu-jitsu. He's got porous takedown defense. He's got better striking than Mark Madsen, I'd hazard to guess. So what do you think about this one?
I've always had a really hard time with Jared Gordon in his career because he is one of these weird fighters who kind of got his second prime later in his 30s. I always felt like Jared Gordon was very heavily promoted earlier on, didn't necessarily meet expectations, but once people did all of a sudden kind of cut stock with him, he did go on a bit of a run, which was nice to see.
You beat Hakron Diaz. You're going to get that promotional push.
But that was the thing about Gordon. I, for one, just thought, hey, he's pretty well-rounded, right? He's got the boxing, he's got the offensive wrestling. We've seen him, come up short against specialists even in the things that he does well. But the thing that you always like about Jared Gordon is he does do a good job of switching up the dynamic of the fight. Hey, I'm struggling with my striking. I'm going to go to my wrestling now. Or hey, my opponent's really good with their BJJ. He can use his takedown defense, but that's the thing. It never really has been at the level of his offensive wrestling because his offensive wrestling is pretty good when he's able to mix in the boxing as well. I do think it's a factor of the ranges complement each other. But with Gordon... It's just always been weird. That's the thing. It was, hey, he did a really good job when I thought he wasn't going to. And now on this recent run, I for one thought he did beat Paddy Pimblett. It was a close fight. That is something I will say. Like, people thought Jared Gordon beat him like 30-20. It wasn't that case by any means. I thought Jared Gordon won the fight, but again, it was a fairly close fight. But the thing about Gordon is he going to be able to offer anything off of his back if he does get taken down? Because Grant Dawson, even though he did do a good job at the long range with his kicks, I think would offer a lot more off his back when he does get taken down than a guy like Gordon, who does resort to a lot of those just kind of hold downs, wait for the ref to stand up. And that's what I worry about in this matchup, because if Madsen is able to just use those offensive takedowns and not even do a lot with them, just maintain that top position until the round's over, I think he could go back to one of those y'all must have forgot performances. But it always is difficult picking a guy who is such a specialist against someone who could use the other parts of his game.
Madsen's an interesting guy because typically he targets the head with a lot of his boxing. He will throw in the odd leg kick. He doesn't really target the body at all. He goes for takedowns, and more often than not, just so far in the 5 UFC fights, he hasn't really been able to get one of those big hallmark finishes. You might think of the Danilo Belluardo fight, but that's Danilo Belluardo.
Do you worry about
offense.
his pace at this age? Like, that's something that Mark Madsen really needs.
Yeah, he
looks just the physicality.
He looked so tired in the third round against Grant Dawson, and I know the leg kicks took their toll. He gets dropped. He ends up getting finished on the mat. But again, when I look at this fight, Jared Gordon's such an interesting case, not because of just the second win, but the second win from 2020 to 2021. 145, 150 because of a Gordon weight miss, and then 155, 3-0, capped off by a win over the Sweet Prince, Matt. If you go down through it, you look at the 5-on-in, a win over Joe Selecki by split decision. He then loses to Grant Dawson, and he beats Leonardo Santos. He loses to Paddy Pimblett, and so on. But the fight that Jared Gordon had against Leo Santos, he teed off on my guy, and it made me sad to watch it. So again, it is the grappling specialist, the wrestling specialist, I should specify, in Mark Madsen, working the striking at home. We'll see how that pays out in this fight for him. If you do look at the odds in this matchup, Matt, Mark Madsen, the underdog, Jared Gordon, the favorite. We have a look at the Topology vote. Surprise to us, it is to you. Madsen's been out for about a year since his Grant Dawson fight. For Jared Gordon, his fight against Bobby Green, it was earlier on this year. I'm going to say over under. I think it's going to get spicy in this one. I'm going to say over under 80% Gordon.
I think it's going to be like 65% Gordon, so I'll say under. It's the other way?
I don't know how this stuff works anymore. 1,114 total votes, 60% Madsen, 86% by decision. For the 40% that have Gordon, 83% by decision. I think Jared Gordon beats Mark Madsen by decision because look at how Jared Gordon fought against Joe Selecki. Awfully. And it was a split decision win, and most people thought that Joe Selecki would win it. I think Joe Selecki would beat Mark Madsen. Jared Gordon, when he does get down to the mat, he's not a turtle. He's not a turtle. He can get off his back. He can utilize jiu-jitsu. I think his jiu-jitsu is that kind of final trump card against Mark Madsen's wrestling, and I think Jared Gordon can do enough in this fight to score points with the judges and win.
I agree with your prediction. I do think Jared Gordon's going to be able to win this fight based largely on what he's going to be able to do on the feet. Too. Exactly. I think the hooks are going to land if Mark Madsen does decide to stand in the pocket, because he's not just going to go out there and shoot for the hips of Jared Gordon's second one. And if he does, I mean, we're going to get all the answers pretty quick, right? Either Mark Madsen completes the takedown, stays on top for the whole round, and that's probably rinse and repeat, or Gordon makes it really competitive, makes him work through some of those positions. I just think Madsen's so heavy on top that it's going to be difficult for Gordon to try to get into advantageous positions. I think he's going to do enough outside of that, because that's the thing about fighting a guy like Mark Madsen. You're going to have to fight off your back at some point, and I'm sure his coaches have informed him about that. So I do like Jared Gordon for the well-roundedness, but it's a really fun fight.
We're going with the guy who's coming home again. It's Flash Gordon, Jared Gordon to get the win. Sam J. Jones, maybe. A big-time fight for him against the Olympian. Let us know who you have down below in the comments section on this one, Matt. Some big-time fights in the card. Tabatha Ricci's going to fight Lupita Godinez. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. The second of three Longo and Weidman MMA competitors to compete on this card. We have the Black Wolf, Nazim Sadykhov, joining his teammates Matt Frevola and, of course, Dennis Buzukja. Sadykhov in this matchup taking on Slavaklaus, Viacheslav Borshchev. Matt, this is one of the highest level striking affairs next to the main event, the co-main event, of course, but this one features two incredibly high level strikers. And when you look at a guy like Slavaklaus, Viacheslav Borshchev, 18-2 the kickboxing record, a WAKO, a champ in kickboxing, a world champ, a Russian national champ. When you look at a guy like Nazim Sadykhov, gets the win on Contender Series last year, what does the UFC do? Hey, two-part series on our YouTube channel about your family's lineage in Azerbaijan. But if you look at it for Nazim Sadykhov, he was a two-time WKA US national champ in kickboxing. He was a junior Northeast judo champ, and he was also a master of sport in hand-to-hand combat and combat sambo. So again, when you look at these two guys, numbers on a page, they're very credited in striking.
Well, that's what this fight is. Let's just take us back for a second. Do you know what the most cracked out animated movie of all time is? Hoodwinked. Now, Hoodwink's one of the great films of all time. It's widely considered the #1 Knives Out. It just happened to be animated and involved a lot of mythical creatures. But my point is, one of the funniest scenes in that whole movie
is the goat.
No, well, the goat's funny. But they're in the mine shaft riding around, and he goes, "That candle's really bright. What is it?" And this just tiny Hispanic squirrel goes, "Dynamite!" And then he throws dynamite. That's what this fight is, Craig. It's dynamite. I think he was.
Well,
my point being, this fight is absolutely dynamite. Just in terms of stylistically, it gives you everything you want to see out of a striker's first MMA fight, right? I know we both brought up quite a few concerns out of Slava Borshchev in terms of the holes of his game.
Whoa.
I guess you more so than me. I seem to pick him in every fight.
Slavakov is 2-2 in the UFC. He's won both of those fights by knockout. One over Dakota Bush. Gary Bush.
Looks good.
Performance bonus. He got a performance bonus last time out against Mahashata. Dropped him 3 times. He was credited for that. In his 2 losses, Slava Borshchev has been taken down 20 times.
It's a lot.
20 times.
My point is, though, we're going to get the best version of both guys in this matchup, or at least you would assume so. Because the one thing I love when I go back and watch Nazim Sadykhov when he fights is, when he gets inside the pocket, those feet do like a half circle left and right to where he almost skips outside of the range of his opponent and does a great job of striking from both sides. And I really like that part of his game, and I think it's going to help him offensively open up quite a few strikes around the somewhat predictable guard of Borshchev. But the problem is, Slava has so much power on some of these hooks that if Sadykhov does zig when he should zag and just move the wrong way, it might look great until it doesn't. And we could have one of those situations. I'm sorry to bring this up because I remember you were a big fan of this guy. Remember when Andrei Koreshkov fought Douglas Lima the second time after he beat him in the close decision? He was teeing off on him up against the cage, and all of a sudden Douglas Lima put those arms up. He went left, he went right, and he threw one of the biggest hooks you've ever seen. I think this could be one of those weird fights where Sadykhov is rolling, it is looking really good, but he just makes that one wrong mistake where he walks into a big shot.
Yeah, and Sadykhov, he does have decent grappling. We've seen him out grapple in fights, sure, but if you look at it, again, numbers on a page, 9-1 as a pro. He had a tidy amateur record, and again, for Slavakov, he competed in another sport before he joined this one. He actually competed in 2. He was 2-0 in pro boxing in 2019. From March to August, he had a couple of fights there. 18-2 in kickboxing. So far, 7-3 in the mixed martial arts. And if you look at it, he's fought from behind. He considers fighting against Chris Duncan on Contender Series. It's Borshchev rallying back in the second round. He's beating Mahashata's last time out. For Sadykhov, the 2 UFC fights. One against Evan Elder, where he lost the first 2 rounds, and then there's a nasty cut on Elder. It ends up as a fight of the night, and it's a 3rd round TKO win due to that cut for Sadykhov. So Sadykhov's next time out, he fights Terrence McKinney, and he loses the first round handily. But if you watch the second round, Matt, oh boy, he's able to get the back of McKinney, chicken wing one of the arms, and then you can't defend the rear naked choke at that point.
It was really impressive.
So he gets the win, a performance bonus for Sadykhov his last time out. So again, these 2 guys, for Borshchev, he's going to get better at Team Alpha Male. I mean, as it continues, the progression has to happen, right? I think it will. I don't know if it will. I hope it will. It might.
Young's pretty good.
Training with guys like Darren the Damage Elkins, who can still win fights. I mean, maybe he'll get better. He won't become Darren Elkins.
I just don't understand why when you sign on to fight Darren Elkins, you don't immediately buy a Peloton. Like, you know what you're getting yourself into. You're going to be so tired by the end of it. It just
is tough. And again, you see those losses, one to Mike Davis, Beast Boy, and one to Mark Jacasey, the lay and pray artist himself. You got to look out for it. So, Matt, when we do look at this fight, Slava Borshchev, he is a fan favorite. He is a slight underdog in this one. Sadykhov, the slight favorite. We have a look at the Topology votes. Apparently today, I have no basis, no compass on these. Maybe it's the fan coming out in me low these many years. But, Matt, I'll let you set this one.
I think they're going to be fairly close, honestly. I'm going to set them at 60% Sadykhov.
And I'm going to say over, and on this one, it's way over. 1,030 total votes, 83% Sadykhov, 29% by decision, 49% by submission. Maybe a little bit of recency bias in there with the McKinney win.
I think you do bring up a good point, though.
For the 17% that are Borshchev, 70% by knockout. And again, the zig to zag, even look at his fight against Kenley St. Louis, who's done things since that fight. Borshchev gets dropped in that one. He rallies himself back. Both these guys are extremely tough. They've got that dog in them.
They do.
We know that they do. And they're willing to come back in some of these fights. I think this is, if it stays standing, one of the highest level affairs you're going to see in a really long time. And I have a hard time making the pick in this.
So do I, just because Slava Claus has, like, ridiculous power for the size of him. And I know, I guess 155, you have quite a few knockout artists, but he's one of these guys who, when he can land consistently on his opponent, it takes him a little while to find his range, right? He's like Randy Johnson before he won all the Cy Youngs. He can be a little bit wild, but once he hones in and he's able to land those power shots,
he's picking out birds.
Exactly, that's how good he is. Unless you are a really high-level wrestler, it's really difficult to match what he's able to give to you on the feet. But I do think the movement of Sadykhov is going to at least be able to answer some of that. And I'm glad you bring up the submission win the last time out, because up until that win, like, I wasn't expecting him to go out there and rear naked choke a lot of guys. He does have good grappling, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't like he was stopping a lot of fights by submission on the regional scene. I think it's a good point to bring up, though, just because on the feet, it gives Slava the greatest chance to win this fight, even though I do favor Sadykhov. But on the mat, if he's able to get it there, I do think he will have quite a big advantage. I expect quite a bit of ground and pound from that spot as well. So I do have Sadykhov, but I just think stylistically it's one of those fights that's going to bring out the best of Borshchev.
I'm going to say something people aren't going to like, but I'm going to say it regardless. Watch out for the cage grabs, the fence grabs from both these guys. If there are takedown attempts, look out. The other thing about it, Matt, you said in the last fight, I'll say it in this fight, you talk about how trippy this can be between a couple of strikers. I dug this one out of the archives. I've got a Doc Ellis Tops card. This one was made and designed by Matt. Read the name that's on there.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. Ring card girl.
Brittany Palmer.
Brittany Palmer.
A phenomenal artist.
Yeah, I've got 3 Brittany Palmer
she has
cards.
Nice pieces.
Here, yep, she does. But here in the office, and it's a Doc Ellis one who famously was able to just toss
through a no-hitter.
A wild game while high on LSD. So, Matt, when you do consider that and how hard of a job that would be, it's got to be a hard job trying to code the strikers.
Hey, how wild are you planning to get while you watch
when I look at this one, I also had Nazim Sadykhov. I think the stance switches and the southpaw nature could be to his benefit. But again, that opens up the left hook to the body of Slava Borshchev, who has liver punch knockout wins, and it also opens a body kick in Nazim Sadykhov that's one of his better shots.
This is a point that I always go back to, just because it was a fight that I remember oddly well. I remember when Mark Hunt was at like the peak of his powers, and he fought Junior Dos Santos, and I believe it was even a title eliminator at the time. But when you look at that fight, the easiest way to break it down is Mark Hunt, one of the great kickboxers in the heavyweight division. Junior Dos Santos has mixed martial arts skills. He can take you down. He has BJJ. But what does he win most of his fights with? His boxing. And I think this fight does have some similarities to that. Now, GDS didn't need his wrestling, really. He went out there and boxed Mark Hunt up. But I do think that just stylistically, this fight, more than most others, is going to give Borshchev a great chance to win.
Matt, a big-time fight. I expect the folks to be out there in the comments on this one. Let us know. Yeah, both of us going with the Black Wolf, Nazim Sadykhov, to get the win. This really sets us up well for this insane main card. The 2 title fights up at the top. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.
Budding strawweights battle it out in New York City this weekend. We have Baby Shark Tabatha Ricci looking to make it 5 wins in a row. She's going to be taking on Loopy, Lupita Godinez. And for Godinez, she looked amazing. Unstoppable her last time out against Elise Reed. It's going to be another camp, not at Titan Athletics or Titan MMA down the way. Well, actually completely across the country in Vancouver, British Columbia, but she's actually training at Lobo Gym MMA with the cast and crew that you know already. Diego Lopes, Alessandro Costa, everybody's on this card. But Matt, the wild winding road that both these women have had for Godinez with the LFA, with BTC in Canada, for Tabatha Ricci a little bit with the LFA, and in the UFC, it's been a little weird. And people, if they follow me on X, they follow me on Twitter, they saw what I did. Matt, let's talk about it. I made a chart. I made a chart right here. I'll blow it up. As we talk. People will be able to see this. So we can reference it down here, but the people will see the graphic up there. So I've got talent of opponent and then the number of fights. Godinez has had many more fights in the UFC. She's had 9. Tabatha Ricci has only had 5. And Lupita Godinez, the craziest part about it is she started at the bottom. She started at the bottom of the rung. She took on Jessica Penne, or near the bottom.
I feel like I'm in the happening right now, and you just figured out the trees are the one responsible for all of this.
She loses to Penne. She beats Gomez Juarez. She loses to Carolina, and then we start to go up on a trajectory. Wow. Beats Lookbunmi. She beats Carnelosi. She loses to Hill. She beats Calvillo. She beats the Cody, and then for some gosh darn reason, they go, hey, how about you fight Elise Reed? And Godinez just never... Yeah. Godinez, I mean, listen, the ink is always wet, and she's got to sign her name on a piece of paper. So she fought Reed. She gets the win there. The trajectory of Lupita Godinez confuses the hell out of me. It makes no sense. I think that she's had bigger wins so far in her career. Not Tabatha Ricci, but this would be a big one. She's fought on this really weird trajectory to where, in my graphic, you can see Ricci fights Fiorot, and then goes all the way down and fights Maria Oliveira, and then since then it's gone up. Pauliana Viana, Loma Lookbunmi, and her last time out, Jillian Robertson. It's gone up, again, a future title challenger, flyweight, all the way down, and then it's built itself back up.
But I think that's why I like this fight so much, because it does feel like a reset at a higher level of competition for both athletes, which is really what they both need. Like, I couldn't agree anymore.
To me, I look at it, Tabatha Ricci, you get to take on somebody that's close to your equal. I mean, again, neither one of these women are in the top 15, but they feel like they are. They're will be. They should
20,
be.
I'd say.
And when you look at a matchup like this, for Lupita Godinez, again, I always talk about the Garbat fight, the fights that she had with the LFA. Godinez, it was the boxing. And the last couple of fights, we've seen the boxing at the forefront again. Again, you're going to see her wrestling. You're going to see a little bit of the grappling. But when Lupita Godinez is on, she's really, really on. And with Tabatha Ricci, what was she? An amateur national junior Brazilian Muay Thai champ. She's a jiu-jitsu world champ multiple times over. She trains at Paragon BJJ. She trains at King, she trains in Southern California with some of the best men and women that you're going to find out there. And for Ricci, you look at her last fight against another Canadian, or natural-born Canadian, Jillian Robertson. She's winning in the wrestling, she's winning in the striking. So Ricci, to me, has gotten better in the striking. Godinez, all of a sudden, has really found that Goldilocks zone within her own game.
Well, the thing about Ricci, too, is I think her offensive wrestling's getting a little bit better, too. Or just her wrestling in general. Not that her grappling was ever bad, it's at the forefront of her game, but I just think the addition of, hey, your wrestling went from being slightly below average to even average now does help her open up the rest of her game and those strengths. And I think the wrestling offense and defense for both these women is going to be the most important, because I think both fighters are going to have an advantage in the top position if they're able to get into it, but the same thing has to be said. If they do end up on their back, I think it's going to be difficult in terms of activity as well, because I think on the feet it's going to be a really interesting fight. If Godinez is able to get on the inside of Ricci's range, which is a weird thing to say, right? Neither one of these athletes are big for the division, I wouldn't say. Like, Godinez normally is the smaller fighter, and she's going to have the size advantage in this one, but Godinez's boxing, I think, her ability to land good, maybe not the biggest power shots you've ever seen. She's not Francis Ngannou.
That delayed left hook, it was like a video game against Elise Reed that sent her all the way across. It was like she got hit by 10,000 ghosts.
But that's the thing about Godinez. Sorry, you had me think about Elise Reed, oddly enough. But for Godinez, if she's able to defend the takedowns and establish that boxing range, what is Ricci going to do to get out of it? Because I don't know if she's a complete enough striker to use her movement and then somehow just capitalize all of a sudden with the wrestling. Now, I think both these fighters are talented enough to get a submission, but it's probably going to come in different ways. I think Godinez goes out there and gets a submission win. It's probably going to be later on in the fight, I'd say, after Ricci's a little bit more tired, whereas Ricci does have a little bit more shiftiness to her game. And if she is able to catch an arm or a leg earlier on in the fight, I wouldn't be as surprised, but still, I think it's a really fun fight, because I agree with your graphic, and I think this is the fight that shows them going back up, right? This isn't fighting Manon Filho again, but if you get a win over Lupita Godinez, it's a great win to set you up for your next fight, and likewise with Godinez if she's able to beat Ricci.
On my graphic, Ricci's been on the way up. She has been on the way up.
No, but it would be a massive spike towards the top, I would say, or at least a decent level, because I think if Godinez goes out there, this is a better win than the Jillian Robertson win, even though Robertson's the more well-known of the two, I would say.
I would agree with that point. So again, when you look at this one, Godinez is favored in the matchup to the tune of about a -150. Ricci, the underdog, she's got the longer win streak coming into this one. MMA math, if you want to play tinfoil hat. Godinez lost to Jessica Penne. Tabatha Ricci beat her. And
M. Night Shyamalan's had 2 shoutouts this episode, and no one would have predicted that.
Yeah, it's a crazy twist at the end. Matt, we have a look at the topology votes. Surprise us there to you. I'm going to say over-under. I think it's going to be close. I'm going to say 62.5% Godinez.
I oddly enough think Ricci's going to be the favorite.
And I don't know what's going on this week. Upside is down and down is upside. 1,038 total votes, 68% Ricci, 88% by decision for the 32% that have Godinez, 81% by decision. I think Godinez wins in a boxing affair in this one. I really do think that training more than full time or spending more time down in Mexico, training with Grasso, Aldana, and the like, it's really going to help out Godinez. And again, for Ricci, all I can think of is, and it's the bad thing, 5 fights in the UFC, and I think the loss against Minoff Fiaro, but sometimes
good.
Ricci, when she's striking, it's fast and loose with the defense, and the hands can drop, and the head is there, and the body's there, and I think Godinez can capitalize on that. And I think Godinez is a decent enough defensive wrestler against somebody like Tabatha Ricci, who does have a black belt, not just jiu-jitsu, but also judo. That was the first love, judo. Writing in a notebook with a heart.
Best I ever had.
As the U.
Judo.
But for me, I do have Loopy Godinez in the matchup.
I also have Godinez, but this is the weird factor I'm going to throw into the fight, and it's probably not going to matter at all. Godinez's probability to finish this fight is, 12%, let's say. Like, she's probably going to win by decision, I think. I think she's going to use her pace, use her boxing, like you said, and probably win the fight that way. Ricci's percentage to win by finish is higher, I think. I think it's like 22%. And maybe it doesn't matter in the end because there's not that big of a difference between the two. But I do think if Ricci is able to out-scramble Godinez, if Godinez does find herself going for an ill-advised takedown attempt, I think Ricci could not only end up in an advantageous position, but just do enough with it to where Godinez has to have a really good second and third round perhaps to kind of make up the difference. So I do have Godinez for the completeness of her game, but I do think there's a couple trap doors there that could get her caught.
The homework, go back and watch Godinez's fight with Vanessa Demopoulos for the title in the LFA. Matt, a big time fight. Both of us going with the Mexican-Canadian Loopy Godinez to get the win. Matt, some big time fights in this card. Pavlovich taking on Aspinall. That's for an interim belt, brother. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.
Fight Night Picks fans, UFC 296, it's the great goodbye. And Matt fans, they've turned on us. They think I don't like MMA anymore, and they think all I am is negative. So guess what, for the fans that are out there? I'm going to turn this video on its head. We're going to have a little bit of fun with this one. I'm going to do it like none other. I think Diego Lopes beats Pat Sabatini with his striking. There, I said it. I think Diego Lopes is where Pat Sabatini was 2-3 years ago. There, I said it. I'll start the video out this way. Because, Matt, when we look at a fight like this, folks think that these videos are just... Listen, they're just that easy to make. Go try it. But when you look at this fight, Matt, and I'm going down and doing the tape study, the guy with the John and Kate +8 in the front, Diego Lopes, you look at the wins that he had on the regional scene. He goes in and he takes on Joe Anderson Brito. He's struggling, not just with the striking, but the eye pokes, the constant eye pokes. A technical decision win for Brito in a third round that's a 10-10 because all that was thrown was an eye poke. And ultimately, Lopes has to prove himself in the regional scene. He loses a close split decision after that to Nate Richardson. He's 3-1 since then. Wins over Kenneth Glenn on Hel Rodriguez. A loss to Movsar on 4 days' notice where, hey, there were people out there saying that Lopes won. And then he was able to go out there and beat Gavin Tucker, the great, representing Newfoundland as well as Nova Scotia. Gavin Tucker, he was booked to fight Pat Sabatini umpteen different times.
I think that would have been a fun fight.
They all fell out. But when I look at this fight, Matt, for Sabatini, we saw it in the Emmers fight. We saw it in the fight against Damon Jackson. We saw a long layoff, and then Sabatini poured it on another Brazilian fighter. And Lucas Almeida. I mean... there are fish that can be out of water for long periods of time. I think mudfish, flying fish is out of water for a little bit.
Can too. I don't know enough about them though.
I had a catfish one time, got sick to my stomach. Let me tell you, not really catfish. A popular fish out this way.
I like haddock, swordfish. It's a nice fish. Or
aiglefin, as they're called in French.
Cod's a good fish.
Cod's a good fish too. But Matt, the point of the video is we're trying to keep this one quick.
Salmon.
Shout out to all the fish species.
Fish is really good.
But Matt, when you look at this one, for me with Sabatini, we know how lights out the jiu-jitsu can be.
Marketing.
We know how good his resolve can be, especially after having the elbow dislocation CFFC title fight, rallying himself back in, stringing off a lot of wins, beating a Canadian in TJ Laramie. And again, against one Lucas Almeida, the toughest Lucas you know. He's the toughest Lucas I know of. If you look at that one, for the percentage that he was able to keep that fight down to the mat, 4 minutes and 50 seconds of control time in the first round. It's a lot. Yeah, I mean, the other 10 seconds, he could have been doing whatever he wanted. And then in the second round, pretty well the entire time until he got the submission, it was all Sabatini. To me, I just look at it. Diego Lopes, we know he's the jiu-jitsu coach at Lobo Gym MMA. We also know how good he is when he gets the mat and how squirrely he is. You saw that against Gavin Tucker.
Back,
and you saw it on the regional scene as well. I just think that Lopes is the better striker in this fight by quite a wide margin. That's why I have the win here.
The problem I have with a lot of past Sabatini's fights, though, is the weakness is very easy to observe, right? When he gets hit, he doesn't react well. He might not be the most durable fighter we've ever seen. But on the other side, when he gets top position on guys, it does look pretty good.
He has ground and pound.
He's got ridiculous ground and pound. He does a really good job of navigating his way through the guard. He gets into really dominant positions. He does a great job of using the ground and pound to then open up submissions. So there is a part of me that thinks for as good as Diego Lopes is, especially off his back and threatening with his own submissions, if he's not sound enough in the positions outside of those submissions, it might just be a case of he's just creating additional movement, and it's going to help Sabatini get that much closer to him, and that's what worries me. Because when Sabatini's able to get into those positions, we don't really got to worry about him eating massive shots to the face when he is in that top spot with the wrestling. So I agree with you. I do like Lopes on the feet for his ability to land some of those shots. It's just Sabatini is one of those games that is so singularly focused that once he's able to get it to that spot, it really doesn't matter what his weaknesses are.
My phone's ringing. Can you pick it up?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. Hey.
Hello.
Hi. Would you like a tattoo? That's what I was looking at. Would you like a tattoo?
Sure, yeah.
Do you want one on your chest?
It depends. What are you trying to sell me?
Well, do you have a haircut like Kate from John and Kate Plus 8?
I kind of look like a tall lesbian, but I wouldn't go that far.
That was inappropriate. But how about dream, believe, and make it happen? Would you like that?
I think our mom had that in our bathroom at some point.
Well, one of these guys has that tattoo on his chest. It's very aggressive. Matt, when we do look at the overall layout in this fight, and you do consider it, these two guys, I mean, very evenly matched. They're very good with their jiu-jitsu. It has been said time and again. We have a look at the Topology votes. Surprised that's there to you. I think the fans are going to be where my head's at. I'm going to say over under 67.5% Lopes.
I'm going to say over.
And it is over 1,133 total votes, 79% Lopes, 60% by submission. Gee whiz. 21% of Sabatini, 75% by decision. Who do you have in the fight?
The reason I brought up Lauri Markkanen earlier was it's a player who had really high expectations and wasn't good, and I thought he was terrible. I thought Lauri Markkanen was one of the worst players in the NBA and was trash. Here's the thing, though. Lauri's good. Like, a change of scenery can make you
Sabatini is
better,
the favorite in the fight.
which is surprising to see, honestly. And that's the thing with Sabatini. It's one of those games where when he's able to get it into the right circumstances, where he does excel, it just does look so good. And I do think it's something you can build upon. The striking at a certain point before he was really starting to get clipped, I thought was making improvements. We saw more kicks involved in his game, not only to the leg, but to the body as well. And I thought he was steadily making some of those improvements. And it's a case of, if he keeps on doing that, I think he can win. I'm really sitting on a fence right now, and I'm trying not to. I'm going to say Diego Lopes. I do think his striking is more complete at this time, but what I saw out of Sabatini, I was impressed by with some of those improvements. It's just, can he continue to get back on that path?
He looked amazing his last time out against Lucas Almeida, made the striker his buddy, made him his buddy down on the mat and got the win there. Matt, both of us going with Diego Lopes to get the win. Let us know who you have in the matchup, and if I really do hate MMA, would I make a handmade graphic like that
poster
for Ricci Godinez? No, you silly goose. Some big time fights on this card, Matt, including the 2 title fights are still up there at the top. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. It is a lightweight possible fight of the night. A couple of guys on some tidy win streaks. We got New York's own Matt the Steamroller Frevola. 3 straight first round knockout wins. Frevola finding that power surge. He's taking on God of War, Benoit Saint-Denis. Matt, the fans are going to be excited about this fight. If you look at it from Matt Frevola, he was a lieutenant in the U.S. Army Reserve. Benoit Saint-Denis was a 1st Marine Infantry paratrooper in the old regiment that was the French SAS. So both guys military men, both guys with knockout power. Benoit Saint-Denis' first love was judo. Or maybe it was something else, but I think it was judo. And if you look at it in a guy in Benoit Saint-Denis, you knew him from fighting at middleweight, welterweight, super lightweight, and 155. That's lightweight, brother. And Benoit Saint-Denis has been able to carry the same things throughout the weight classes. Really heavy on his takedown attempts. This guy puts the full force of his body weight into it. This guy's tougher than a box of ramset nails. I'm talking about the ones with a little bit of plastic that you have to hit with a 22 shell to punch down into concrete. This guy's got that. When you look at a guy like Matt Frevola, you might have said he's softer than Baby Shark, but if you look at it, losing to Paulo Reyes, hey, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. He got knocked out cold in that one. Beating Jalen Turner is pretty cool, and then going on this recent run's great. And oh yeah, by the way, that crazy knockout lost to Terrence McKinney in a few seconds. But overall, eating the 1-2 from McKinney, eating a big hook from a guy like Paulo Reyes, that's enough to put out a horse sometimes. So if you do look at this matchup, Matt, both these guys can get it done with their striking. You saw that from Saint-Denis a little bit against Moises. You definitely saw it against... Where are those Bonfim brothers? Where are they at? Ishmael Bonfim. So if you look at it for Saint-Denis, if I could make a musical reference, it's like Ozzy Osbourne in the 80s. Like my favorite Ozzy Osbourne song. Flying high again. This guy's on top of the mountain. Matt Frevola is as well. And if you look at it for Matt Frevola, this is his first time fighting in New York since UFC 281 when he's able to go out there and get the first round knockout win over Potato Gates Otman Zaitser.
I like Matt Frevola a little bit too, Drew Dober, and I don't just mean that because he has the win over him, but think about Dober and his career, right? He was not a knockout artist whatsoever in the early goings of his UFC career. He was winning a lot of his fights by decision and losing a lot of his fights by decision too. But then all of a sudden he found this power surge and he became a different fighter. And I do think Matt Frevola has altered the way that he fights, right? He does seem to sit down a lot more on his own shots. He's much more dedicated to his own power shots. Like, just look at the record. It's absurd. But the thing about Frevola is, and always has been, I like the wrestling, and I feel like people have forgotten about how good of a wrestler Matt Frevola has been throughout his career because you get so caught up in the early in the recent knockouts. But you bring it up, and I'm happy you do. Jalen Turner's a great fighter, guys, but what's he not good at? The takedown defense isn't all that great.
Saw that against Gamrot.
And was he able to land shots on the feet against Matt Frevola like he did against Gamrot? Yes, but Frevola was able to consistently not only land shots up top, but do a good enough job defensively to avoid the knockout blow, get in on the hips of him, and take him down. But I just feel like people have forgotten that that's the version of Matt Frevola, that's what at least I think of, right? I know he has the knockout power now, but I do think the wrestling is going to be able to at least match what some of the wrestling of Saint-Denis brings to the table. But the difficulty I have with this fight is, can Saint-Denis do enough with his volume if Frevola can make him pay with some of those power shots? Because I do think Frevola can make him pay if he does tend to stand in that pocket for 1 or 2 seconds too long. And if it doesn't really come down to as much of the grappling, is Saint-Denis going to be able to overwhelm him and at least use some of the pressure to get him behind those 2 black lines?
Saint-Denis beat the brakes out of Thiago Moises, performance in the night bonus. He's got really good kicks to the body. He's got pretty good boxing. He got his ears boxed in where Viacheslav Kiselev really wanted to see somebody just get put away against Eliseu Zaleski dos Santos. But when you look at it for Saint-Denis, I think the wrestling's better, which I think is a wild thing to say.
But I think Frevola's going to make it competitive. I don't think it's going to be like a going 7 for 9. You know what I mean?
I think Benoit Saint-Denis can finish him in the first round, the second round, or the third round. I think Benoit Saint-Denis wins this fight.
I think he wins the fight, but I don't think it's as clear-cut as that. I just think Frevola does seem to have the counter for a lot of what Saint-Denis does well, right?
And he does.
Saint-Denis is such a good wrestler, but Frevola, I think, is going to at least defend them at a decent clip. I don't think Saint-Denis is going to just run over him with the striking. I think he's going to eat some shots as a result. I just think, yes, I favor Saint-Denis in a lot of areas, but Frevola does have skills in what Saint-Denis does well himself.
Yeah, we saw Frevola in the exchange against Arman Zarukian. That was a really fun fight. If you look at it for Benoit Saint-Denis, again, if you want to go back, you look at it. He's got 1 no contest on his record, and you might go, okay, well, that's okay. Well, no contest could be due to the sticky icky like Alex Caceres and Kyung Ho Gong, or it could be like Benoit's fight against Paweł Kiliak over at Brave CF. And if you go back and you watch that fight, it's originally scored a TKO win for Kiliak, who's on top. The cuts are too bad. The doctor says that's enough for the fight. And then they overturn it and they say, nah, it's a no contest. There were illegal strikes out there. Didn't look like it when I watched it, but it got overturned to a no contest. We have seen Benoit Saint-Denis compromise there, compromise in the Eliseu fight. And if you look at it from Matt Frevola, wrestling that got him to the dance, his boxing is so much improved. He was our 2022 most improved fighter of the year. We had that on the channel. Matt Frevola accepted that award. digitally. He said thank you, so that was pretty cool, Matt. So did Kenny Florian, so that was neat too. But Matt, when we look at this one, Benoit Saint-Denis, Matt Frevola, it's a very compelling fight. The crowd's going to be amped the F up for this one. Saint-Denis is about a 2-1 favorite, but you can't forget Frevola's win over Zaitsev last year in New York. That was pretty cool. I'm sure the Longo Weidman
and the crowd's going to be behind Frevola. They definitely were
100%. We have a look at the Topology votes, Matt. Surprised us there to you. I'm going to say over under 75% Saint-Denis.
That's what I was thinking. I'll say over.
Run the Jewels, they would say ooh la la ah wee wee. It is over. 1,210 total votes, 80% Saint-Denis, 66% by knockout.
A lot of people predicting stoppage on both sides.
20% that are Frevola, 72% by knockout. So you guys, the fans, have the knockouts. I just think for me, you look at Matt Frevola and what he's done really well lately. It's been walking in with a boxing stance. It's a little bit more to the side. He's not as squared up as some of these other guys are. But for Frevola, it's worked for him. He's got a really long right hand that he can throw out there. He's got good extension on his punches, and he can set things up with a little bit of a jab. He can also threaten with the stance switch, or not the stance switch, the level change, because you worry about him taking you down, especially if you're a striker. So Frevola's got those tricks in his pocket to where Saint-Denis stands a little bit taller. He utilizes more of his kicks. He is a southpaw, and he tends to win out in some of these 50-50 striking exchanges. So for me, I do like Benoit Saint-Denis in the matchup, but I think this is one of the better fights that's on this card.
I think it's going to be one of those weird ones that surprises a lot of people, right? Like, if you're buying this
like Nicholas Dalby against Bonfim.
Like, you're not buying this pay-per-view for Frevola versus Saint-Denis, right? But you're not going to be sad because you did, because I do think it's going to result in a really fun and competitive fight. I favor Saint-Denis, that's who my pick is, but I could easily see this going either way just because Frevola and that dog in his style.
You're going to B-Dub-Dubs or another establishment to
Boston
watch these.
Pizza, perhaps?
Maybe Blackstone in Quebec City. The last time I was there, they were advertising these fights.
And doolies watching the fights.
Matt Frevola is 5-3-1 in the UFC since debuting in January 2018 when he got knocked out by Polo Reyes inside of a round. Matt Frevola, then, has had 9 fights in the UFC. 7 of them have been on UFC pay-per-view undercards. This guy's a cash cow.
Good for him.
He puts butts in seats, and people get excited about Matt Frevola fights. So I can't wait for it. Both of us going with France's own God of War, Benoit Saint-Denis, to get the win. He would vibe with Davison Figueiredo like there's no tomorrow. Matt, a big-time matchup on this card. The next one, it is Andrade versus Dern. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say. Let's get into it. Welcome to Fight Night Picks. We're going to break down a big-time fight at strawweight. You get the former big-time champ in this division. It is Jessica Andrade, the future UFC Hall of Famer. She's going to be taking on Mackenzie Dern, the submission specialist. And when you look at a fight like this, you might think in your mind's eye, wow, it's going to go one of two ways. You might say, wow, Jessica Andrade, she's on a 3-fight losing streak. Mackenzie Dern, she won in a fight of the night her last time out against Angela Hill. I'm going to tell you, this is the most cliffhangers from Price is Right fight that you've ever seen, because right now Jessica Andrade isn't going it's just she's lost 3 fights in a row. They've all been by finish. Now, they've all been against very good fighters. Erin Blanchfield, of course, at 125, and that was off a big win streak for Andrade. She gets knocked out by a big-time counter right against Yan Xiaonan. Her last time out, couldn't defend the takedowns against the Boogie Woman, Tatiana Suarez. So now Andrade, who's got the striking, who's got usually the takedown defense and points, and who can get a submission win in her own right. Andrade, the former bantamweight, gets a shot against Dern. And Matt, we haven't really seen Jessica Andrade in the spot. And by we haven't, she's never lost 3 fights in a row. And the last time that she had lost 2 in a row, she went on a tidy little win streak. So Andrade got her back against the fence, metaphorically and actually in real life. And this is a tough one.
There's a guy who sends me a DM every time I make this reference. He's a big fan of it, and it always breaks his heart. Jessica Andrade reminds me a lot of Allen Iverson. And why do I say that? She's a fighter who relies a lot on her athleticism, be it not only with her offensive striking, with her takedown attempts. Like, Jessica Andrade is going out there shooting single and double legs like Chael Sonnen. It's a lot of single leg, I'm going to pick you up over my head and slam you down with as much power as I can. And it works. up until a certain point, and it has been a little weird, right? Like, the Erin Blanchfield fight, I do think there were enough excuses in that fight to where, hey, if you didn't look good in that, the next one's kind of the chance to get back on the horse and prove you are that top contender. But to see her get hit by those straight shots on the entries in the Yan Xiaonan fight was concerning, because up until that point, she had got hit a lot on the outside, just waiting until her blitzes, other than the fight against, I can't believe I forgot the champion's name. No. Wei Li Zhang, goodness, I couldn't believe I forgot that. Wei Li was able to land those shots down the middle and really make her pay for it, but Andrade's blitzes, I don't think, aren't getting the same levels of respect as they once were.
You look at the finish, the Andrade fight against Yan Xiaonan, how does it happen? If you didn't watch the fight, this is a cliff notes. It's a cliffhanger, and of course, cliffhanger's the game on Price is Right. Andrade is doing that thing where it's really cute until it's not. She's chasing with that pawing jab. She's throwing 4 or 5 jabs.
And she never cuts the cage.
She doesn't cut the cage, so she's moving on a straight line this way, and Yan Xiaonan's turning away. So Andrade's doing this with her head out, and then Yan clips her with a right hook and drops her and finishes the fight. So for Andrade, again, the striking didn't work against Erin Blanchfield. The takedown defense didn't work. She gets finished. The Suarez fight, I do consider it a wash. I think that Suarez, on 115 pounds.
Hopefully she can just be consistent.
It's tough on any good day to beat her. We obviously remember the last fight that Andrade had, setting the strike record against Lauren Murphy. Wow. Listen, pitch black Mountain Dew.
More than I thought.
It'll get back to you. But if you look at those 3 wins that she had before the 3 losses, Calvillo absolutely decimates her. Amanda Lemos, a bigger, taller fighter, and you get her in a standing triangle. And then Lauren Murphy. We haven't seen that fighter in these 3 performances. She tried to do it for a round, half a round, I guess, against Yan Xiaonan. We haven't seen it. Now, on the flip side, for Mackenzie Dern, we always remembered the porous takedown defense. And wow, that's a sign of how good her jiu-jitsu is. I think back to the Hannah Cyphers fight. She's not able to get the takedowns, but she does get the submission win. Mackenzie Dern, a lot of bonuses really for both of these women. But when you look at it for Dern, 3 of her last 4 fights, they've been main events. A loss to Marina Rodriguez. She goes out there, she beats Tisha Torres. That's not a main event. Loses a majority decision to Yan Xiaonan in a main event. And then her last time out, she beats Angela Hill. And that Angela Hill fight, I know I say it's a fight of the night. It's one of those rarities. We had one earlier on this card. Erceg beats Dvorak. It's a performance of the night bonus. 30-27, 229-28. That's really weird. Mackenzie Dern, 49-44s out there, and it's a fight of the night? How is that? Because Angela Hill won 1 round. Round 3, round 5 were 10-8s for Dern, and in the first round, she's backing up Angela Hill and lands a right that drops Hill. Who is this Mackenzie Dern? I said this last week, getting ready for the Hill fight against D. Gomes. There's another weird parallel. SoCal versus PRVT. D. Gomes, where you at, bud? She wasn't able to go out there and beat Angela Hill. That surprised many, I think. But when you look at a fight like this, Matt, to me, Mackenzie Dern's last fight is one of 2 things. She's trained at Ruka Sport for a really long time. She's working her boxing against some really good men and women. But is that the Naaman Gracie fight against Logan Storley? Is that, wow, your boxing's great, and then Naaman Gracie, it was just a one-time thing.
How do you beat the Jessica Andrade question? There's a YouTube channel out there called Secret Base. Shout out them, they're really good. And they're doing a series called How to Make a Basket. And it's called The Story of Shaq and Kobe. And it's basically just asking a question of how do we make a basket.
But hold on.
And what's the best way of doing it. How do you beat Jessica Andrade? We have seen that she can be submitted if you can get her in compromising positions and really use your force to get on top of her. And when I say submitted, I would almost kind of liken the Shevchenko fight into that, right? That was a TKO, but that was a dominant position. She held her down, got it. So I just mean for Andrade, we've seen her struggle off her back, so people have really dominant physicality, A, to get past her own physique, and B, takedown attempts, and B, good power, who could respond and land down the middle and really make her pay for some of those flurries. I don't know if Dern has enough power moving backwards to make her pay for the flurries. And you bring up the takedown defense. Her takedown offense has never been a number that you really wow over. But
it's gotten better.
It has gotten better. But I don't know if she has the type of offensive wrestling that can really make Jessica Andrade pay for having her hands up, going for those bigger shots. If Dern is able to duck underneath, I know Dern's going to look great if she is able to get that one position. But I think this is a weird fight where you want to think, hey, it's probably the end of the road for Andrade. But I still think whatever she has left in the tank is good enough to counter some of the offensive Dern.
14 bonuses between the 2 of them for Andrade. She has 3 bonuses in 2 fights against Namajunas. One's a fight of the night where Namajunas won, and one's a fight of the night performance of the night in that slam Bionics, that's a good tune, Matt, and I'll keep saying that forever. When you do look at this matchup, though, Mackenzie Dern is a 2-1 favorite in the matchup. Open -180, -205 right now. You have a look at the Topology votes. I bet you the fans are out in droves going with the favorite here. I'm going to say over under 75% Dern.
It's going to be over.
It's going to be over, and it is over. 1,237 total votes, 80% Dern, 67% by submission for the 20% that have Andrade, 52% by decision, 34% by knockout. Matt, Dern's losses, Marina Rodriguez was able to strike around the outside and get into that really tough second round. Yan Xiaonan was able to strike on the outside and continue it up. And then the other loss is to Amanda Hibas, who was able to strike on the outside. So, Matt, when it comes down to this one, Andrade, it's unfair to say she's in that Jose Aldo bantamweight stage. You're the oldest 32, 33-year-old at that point. And Andrade has so many miles on the odometer that this Toyota Land Cruiser from the 80s, we got to replace not just the transmission. I mean, we're talking about the bearings are squealing when they turn. So who do you have in this matchup here?
Take the squealing bearings, I guess. I don't feel good taking on Andrade, but I'm really surprised to see where the Topology voters are, to be completely honest with you, just because I understand where the odds are that would represent that vote.
But it's a Tony Ferguson fall.
I don't think it is, though. I think Tony Ferguson lost to guys who were worse every single loss, right? And even in some of those fights, he was looking good. He dropped Michael Chandler before he got knocked out by him. Like, there were some flashes. I just think for Andrade, I think she's going to make Mackenzie Dern pay for every moment they are as close as they possibly are, especially on the inside on the feet. Now, if Dern can get it to the mat, she has a massive advantage and she's going to look really good. But I don't know if she's going to want to get herself into some of those takedown attempt positions and get into that range if she's just getting blasted by power shots every time. And I feel like I predicted a lot of Jessica Andrade's losses lately, but I think she's going to look back and have a win in this one.
I don't like this. I'm going to close my eyes.
She knocked out Carolina doing it.
She did, but Matt, we haven't seen it from Andrade in a really long time. I picked her in all of her losses. Why not pick her in this fight? I'll pick Jessica Andrade too in this matchup against Mackenzie Dern. I think the striking can win out. I worry as the fight goes on. I worry about the gas tank. I worry about the weight cut. I realize she's 5'1". She's cutting to 115. But when you used to be a bantamweight and you're very muscle bound and you keep getting older and you have a lot of fights, none of these things get.
And she's the only person who keeps getting older. No one else.
I'm getting older too. I mean,
it's just a weird thing to bring up. And they're getting older. Okay, we all are.
Stevie Nicks one time saying that. Matt, both of us going with the former champ Andrade to get the win. The fans, they can Nelson Muntz us in the comments. They'll have fun with it. But some big time fights on this card. Title fights, they're on the way. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Interim heavyweight gold is on the line in the main event, Matt. This one thrown together on short notice. October 25th, out is John Jones against Stipe Miocic. So in is Tom Aspinall to take on Sergei Pavlovich, Matt. These two guys, they're dominating the UFC countdown this week. They're getting all kinds of airtime. Pavlovich training out of ATT. Tom Aspinall BJJ with his father and Team Calbon as well. And this is the first time that the UFC title has been on the line in an interim capacity since 2021 at UFC 265. Ciryl Gane got the win over Derek Lewis to get that interim belt. Matt, when you look at it, there's been interim titles in the heavyweight division for the longest time. When Brock Lesnar became the champ, there were quite a few interim title fights. There have been some throughout the history. So it shouldn't be a surprise that with Jones out, we do get this matchup. And when you look at this one, we talked about this one off air. Let's bring this conversation to life on air. How often does it happen that an interim title fight feels like it means absolutely nothing?
It is kind of weird, right? Like, the last time I remember a situation like this was when Robert Whittaker fought Yoel Romero. They were like, hey, here's the title. And Robert Whittaker goes, so I'm fighting Michael Bisping next? And Dana White's like, have you heard the main event at Madison Square Garden? We're doing Bisping versus GSP. It is a little bit weird that the winner of this is just going to kind of be, the 1B of the division? Because I assume they are going to do the John Jones versus Stipe fight. Dana White has said as much. I know I don't believe much of what the man says. Promoter going to promote. But Dana himself has said another point that I do think is important, and it's, I don't want to disrespect Stipe by offering him an interim title shot. And I thought that was interesting because I did assume that, hey, Stipe's going to stay on the card and we will get probably Pavlovich because like you had mentioned, he was originally going to be the step-in for this. But it is a little bit odd that we are getting this matchup, even though I do love the fight. It's a weird fight in terms of this. Pavlovich could win by first round knockout like he does against most of these people on this crazy run he's been able to go against. The amount of power he can generate from up close and medium distance is quite absurd. But I think the footwork of Tom Aspinall, if he uses it, is going to pose at least an interesting question for a guy like Pavlovich. Because a lot of these more recent knockout wins that Pavlovich has had are against people who are going to stand right there in front of him and at least go tat for tat with him with some of these shots. And I do think Aspinall's going to at least move his feet early on to try to maybe not avoid the striking completely, right? Because I don't think he's going to go in there and just completely out-wrestle him, but at least try to stick the jab and at least fight slow is what I'm trying to say. I think he's going to try to really feel it out early on.
If you look at it, these two guys were supposed to fight back in October 2021. At the time, Tom Aspinall higher ranked. It was supposed to be 13 versus 15. Aspinall at 13, Pavlovich at 15. Now it's number 2 Pavlovich versus number 4 Aspinall. So the times have changed.
Which is nice to see, right? I feel like there's always those fighters out there who they'll sneak their way into the top 15 and you think, hey, if everything goes right, they can make it up into that title conversation. And for both these fighters, luckily they have been able to put it all together for the most part.
And I keep saying, indefinite hiatus. I'm not coming back in January. I might not even come back in December of 2024. But guess what? Like GNR, the streets don't change, but maybe the names.
Wow.
Matt, I could never understand how in the song Patience that it was 2 people singing the song. I thought, well, there's one guy that talks sings, and there's one guy that really sings, and the guy that goes, "Wow, I need you," isn't the same guy.
At least they're not like Milli Vanilli and they're not singing at all.
Axl Rose, range. But when it does come down to this one, Matt, there's a big X factor for both guys. And I'll throw a tweet that I threw up a long time ago about Sergei Pavlovich. And a lot of people said this. Wow, he's this vaporizing knockout artist. He's got some of the longest arms you're going to find in mixed martial arts, period. And behind the jab is that big right hand. And Vaporize doesn't even do it justice. That right hand as an uppercut, as an overhand, Pavlovich gets it. He just does. But when you look at it, Greco-Roman wrestling is his first martial art, and you don't see it very often. So to the crowd that says, well, Pavlovich has that in his back pocket, we saw it exposed against Alistair Overeem, you saw the plum sweep in the clinch, and then Pavlovich is down on the mat, he gets finished. But for Pavlovich, you look at the 2 fights recently where he's been able to show good defensive grappling. One, Abdurakhimov, early on, puts those 2 arms out there. Pavlovich really quick to raise them up and hit him and make him pay. Same thing with Curtis Blades. So for Pavlovich, we've seen little glimpses of the takedown defense, but we haven't really needed to see it because he's been able to finish guys. For Tom Aspinall, a big point, and they did it justice on the countdown this week. Tom Aspinall, you think of him as this great boxer. He had that long layoff in his pro career. He took a few years off. What was he? Well, he was a sparring partner for Tyson Fury. He wasn't Francis Ngannou, but he was a pretty good sparring partner. So for Aspinall, that's great. That definitely did kind of delineate him from the rest of those British boxers that are on the scene in MMA. But for Aspinall, the first love is jiu-jitsu with his father's school. And you look at the way that not only was Aspinall a jiu-jitsu coach and teacher, but you look at the fights that he's been able to have. The Volkov performance of the night that he's got. For performance bonuses alone, Aspinall's got 5. Pavlovich has got 4 over names like Marcelo Gomes, Shamir Abdurakhimov, Tai Tuivasa. When you look at this fight, Matt, people, they might talk about the wrestling of Pavlovich. They might talk about the jiu-jitsu of Aspinall. We could see that featured in this fight. Pavlovich, the only time as a pro where I've seen it used offensively was his first pro fight. And you might go, Craig, he's had 19 of those. Yeah, his first pro fight against Alexander Derevyanko. In that one, he's got the body lock, and just like Vitaly Minakov, for the kids out there, he was the best with Bellator. He was the best. And then he went away.
Vince McMahon right now.
Vitaly Minakov.
He was the greatest.
You look at Pavlovich, he goes in body lock, he's in front of his opponent, he suplexes him down to the ground, he then gets into mount, and against Derevyanko, he's just doing this. It's all that people wanted to see Charlton Almeida do to Derek Lewis, but Almeida couldn't do it. The hand fighting was too much. Pavlovich does it, he stacks, and then he gets back down against his opponent, and he slams away, and he wins the fight. Pavlovich, I think, does have good wrestling. We saw the worst of it against Overeem. We'll see how it plays out in this fight. Matt, I do think, and again, Countdown's playing it up, but if you watch it, Aspinall, for the longest time, Guy's a heavyweight. He's 6'5", but he moves like a middleweight. Pavlovich moves like a heavyweight, but man, when he moves in that straight line, he's so good. So it's straight line, hot sauce power versus Tom Aspinall, who can move out and around.
I think Tom Aspinall's going to try to be a real slow burn in this fight. I do. I don't think he's going to want to engage with the power of Pavlovich early whatsoever, and I think we will see a lot of that jab and some of the movement on the back foot. In terms of, I always go back to this. I think it was great corner advice by Henry Gracie to Brian Ortega. He goes, Brian, we learn from every touch. And I was like, oh, that's true, right? Like, even if you don't succeed in your takedown, even if you go for an armbar and you don't get it, you do learn a little bit more about your opponent.
That's advice she'd probably give Lisa Ann, too.
My point is, for Tom Aspinall, I think the longer this fight goes, it might not favor him in terms of, he gets the knockout or anything like that. But it's going to give him more opportunities to download the game plan of a guy like Pavlovich, and I think that's going to be a really important factor in this game. Now, if he gets hit by 3 uppercuts in the third round or the second or first, maybe none of that matters whatsoever because Sergei does have that fight-altering power. But I just think, when I think about who does this fight favor in terms of a 5-round atmosphere, I do tend to side with Aspinall just in terms of, I think the longer this goes, it gives him more options to use.
If you look at it for Sergei Pavlovich, he hasn't seen a second round since 2017, so it's been a minute. Knocked out Kirill Sadykhov, baby Fedor, over there. He was a champ with Fight Nights Global as well. For Tom Aspinall, the last time that he saw a second round, it was back in 2016. So it's been a while for these two sluggers to see more than 5 minutes of action. If you look at it, Matt, and you consider the odds in the matchup, they're pretty much at par. So it is a pick'em. We have a look at the Tapology vote. Surprised to us as they are to you. I'm going to say over under 60% Pavlovich.
I think they'll be over. He's been on such a run.
It's slightly under, but they're close. So 1,004 total votes. It's like Bryan Adams in the 80s. Cuts like a knife. Feels so right. 54% at Pavlovich, 91% by knockout.
Makes sense.
For the 46% that have Aspinall, 61% by submission, 29% by knockout. And you got to think, for these guys, they've had UFC main events in the past. You got to get your conditioning levels up for 5 rounds. You would think, and Tom Aspinall's pops is just singing, like just shouting it from the rooftops. This guy, he's faster than the welterweights. He can do 5 rounds in his sleep. I haven't seen it. I believe it. I haven't seen it. Same thing for Pavlovich. So, Matt, for me, I'm going to go with the guy that moves side to side, whose knee buckled against Curtis Blades. And if you put the tinfoil hat on, one guy has a Blades win, one guy has a Blades loss. But not all those things are created equal. I have Aspinall in this fight. I think the takedowns, the jiu-jitsu can play a factor, but for me, it's the movement side to side, and it's the pot shots that he's able to land in those exchanges. That's why I think Aspinall can win. If he can stay out of the range of the big right hand, I think he can get the win. It's easier said than done, so I'd like to know who you have here.
I have Tom Aspinall, but as the words are leaving my mouth, I'm just imagining him getting hit by the biggest 1-2 you've ever seen, and then Sergei Pavlovich holding a gold belt over his head. So I do like where the Tapology votes are. I like where the odds are. I couldn't agree anymore because both guys do have such obvious paths to victory, but I do favor Aspinall for not only the movement, I think he's a little bit faster too, and I think that speed's going to come into play.
Both of us going with England's Tom Aspinall, looking for the first English champ in not that long because you have Leon Edwards. Matt, a big-time fight on this card in the co-main event. The main event, it's on the way. The light heavyweight belt is on the line. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. The light heavyweight strap is on the line in NYC, a place that Alex Pereira, Glory Hall of Famer, he knows very well. I mean, this is an all-timer fight. Pereira taking on Prochazka, as always, one half of your host duo, Craig Allen, Twitter and Instagram, at Craig Allen FNP, with me to my left, to your right, respective socials, Matt Allen FNP. And when we look at a fight like this, Matt, Prochazka wins the belt at UFC 275. It's a giant come-from-behind win. I'll throw the scorecard up there. He was down on a couple of the judges' scorecards. He gets that finish win over Alex Pereira's coach, Glover Teixeira. It's got to be awkward coming into this fight, but that was the fight of the year of 2022. Prochazka is getting ready for UFC 282. To fight for the belt. He's out of his planned bout, one of the worst shoulder injuries you've ever seen, so they say. And in is Blachowicz and Ankalaev. They draw Then Jamall Hill fights Teixeira in Brazil for the belt. Hill gets the win. Then he's sidelined due to injury.
Achilles.
And on the UFC's website today, they still have Jamall Hill listed as the champ with the belt. But this is for the marbles. This is for the real deal. And again, for Pereira, from 2019 to 2023, he has a shot at winning the middleweight and light heavyweight belts in Glory and the UFC. Two organizations, two completely different sports. So a magical moment, Matt. I mean, I can't wait for it. And for Jiri Prochazka, you've seen the rise. It feels like it's been since the 80s, but for me, it's been since 2015. Bueller online too. Matt, when you look at this one, I mean, Edward Rooney didn't know what to do with it. We've seen Jiri Prochazka, and you look at it, I mean, with Ryzen in that 2015 Grand Prix, like we've got on the wall in the office here, he wins a fight against Vadim Nemkov, and then he loses to King Mo in the same night. He goes on a crazy win streak. He's won, 13 fights in a row. It's been an absolute burn, so he's had. And in the UFC, only 3 fights, one a year, so this is his obligatory one this year. He's been all over the world. Folks know him. GQ's done one of those what's in the bag type of videos with him. He's a marquee attraction. But Matt, in this fight, we know that Muay Thai is the first love of Prochazka. We know that kickboxing is for Pereira. You see him in the countdown. He's lifting not that heavy weights. That was kind of weird. He's doing like 25s and 45s on the bench, or at least with a bar. It's an Olympic bar, so that's 45 pounds. But when you do look at this one, these two guys complement each other so well, and that's why it should be a fun fight.
I can't believe you just gave either one of these men any gym advice whatsoever.
No, it wasn't that heavy of weight.
These are two of the scarier individuals you'll ever see in a cage. I love this fight, and it's a weird fight. It's deserving of headlining MSG, but it's not a fight that involves huge names, right? I know Alex Pereira is a Hall of Famer in Glory. He beat Israel Adesanya, but these guys don't transfer over to the mainstream like our original main event was going to be.
Yeah.
It's not like John Jones versus Stipe. John Jones was on Good Morning America after a lot of the bad stuff had happened, but he just so happened to have won the title. Like, John Jones crosses over. Now, this fight, though, for MMA fans, I think this excites them as much, if not more, than the Jones-Stipe fight, just in terms of how good these fighters are and how exciting the matchup's going to be. But it is kind of a weird fight to headline Madison Square Garden when I think about it, that's all.
It is, and when you look at it for both these guys, Prochazka, the time away, again, I keep referencing that countdown, but if you do look at it, we haven't seen Prochazka for a long time, and listen, they've got him out there, and it's almost like when you watch Nacho Libre, and you got that guy that's putting the baby oil on.
They do nothing.
On Ramses, and he keeps going, Ramses is number one. His arms are number one. His brain is number one. The UFC PI guy's like, yeah, like you're better at this. You're good at this. Everything's good.
Like
Everything's
when
great.
Heiner's just getting rubbed down by his trainer doing that promo the
Wearing
one time.
jeans?
That was weird.
Nobody's going to get that reference, but it really did happen. That's an obscure one, brother. But when you look at this one, Prochazka, you look at the training, you look at the footage, you see him training at Mjolnir over in Iceland with Gunnar Nelson. You see him training at Jetsam Gym over in Brno in Czechia, or Czech Republic, as it's known. Prochazka, it seems like things are going well for him. And when he's flowing, he's a hard guy to pin down. Now, he's an easy guy to hit, so it's been seen. And I say that in jest and with respect. If you look at it for Prochazka, a hard fight against Volkan Oezdemir, former title challenger, he's gone on an upswing, Volkan Oezdemir. You look at it for Prochazka, his next time out, he goes out there against Dominic Reyes. He's getting hit.
An athlete.
And then he hits back, especially with that spinning elbow. And then, of course, the resolve in that Teixeira fight as well.
And that was the thing that I was watching, right? I'm watching all these Jiri fights in the UFC, and I'm thinking, hey, he's pretty hittable. And it has been a while since he was in Ryzen, so you go back and you watch the Ryzen fights. The problems are still there, and that is a little bit concerning. Like,
Not the Fabio
beating
Maldonado fight. He's beating the piss out of him.
he beat CB Dollaway in 2 minutes, but a minute of that was CB Dollaway landing a nice jab and backing up Jiri. It's just, he is so hittable that it does make you worry. And I know he does a great job of causing chaos in a lot of the success for his opponent, and that's where Alex could get caught, because this is something I have a really hard time with, and I don't know why it happens. I just, due to fans and how they feel about Adesanya, I feel like everybody glosses over the fact he just knocked Alex Pereira out cold earlier on this year. Like, it's a win that completely gets glossed over and a loss that gets glossed over too, because yes, Alex came out and looked really good on it was a short turnaround, not short notice, is what I almost said, but it was a short turnaround of fighting Jan, but you still gotta worry about the fact that he's not that far removed from such a significant knockout loss. And the reason I want to bring up that knockout loss is, what was Alex Pereira looking like before that? It was all rolling. He looked like he had Izzy hurt up against the cage. He landed the big knee. He looked like he was going to win the fight. He could get carried away and get involved in one of those sequences in this matchup where he lands a big shot on Jiri. He's moving forward, thinking he's going to win. And Jiri, with those unorthodox angles, with the elbows, with the hooks, with the knees, he could be able to land one of those crazy, like, Ricardo Ramos, Ayman Zahabi elbows.
The wildest part about this fight, we did a video during the Pandy about all the divisions, and we stacked them up, and we had like a March Madness bracket. And I swear to you, it's real. Go back and check it out. Jiri Prochazka and John Jones on the picture, and we picked Jiri Prochazka to win.
We may have got caught up in the moment.
We picked Jiri Prochazka to win, and then he went on to continue to win in the UFC and won the belt. If you look at this fight, Matt, Alex Pereira wasn't even around in the realm of possibility, and now all of a sudden we're here. So when you do look at it for Pereira, again, you're going to see the win that he had over Michailidis, who's turned it on after the UFC. That's been a wild run to see if you want to go into obscure promotions. He beat Sean Strickland by finish. He beats Adesanya in NYC about a year ago, and he rallies back at the end of that fight to get the win. Exactly. He drops him. He finishes him. He also gets dropped against Adesanya the next time out. His last fight, we haven't talked about it. Split decision win over Jan Blachowicz. I scored it 29-28 Blachowicz. I also picked Blachowicz to win that fight. So it might be clouded that way. But again, round 1, round 3, you could say Blachowicz. Some might even say round 2. But if you do look at that fight, what were the big keys to it? Alex Pereira had altitude cardio, oddly enough. That fight was at Salt Lake City. Jan Blachowicz, after the first round, the cardio, it just absolutely tanked, and Pereira was able to pull away after the first round. So if you're going to make an argument, Jan definitely won the first round, maybe won the third round, but Pereira was able to pull away with the strikes, and the best strike that we saw from kickboxing to translate into MMA that Pereira has, it's not just the hooks to the body, to the head, it's the leg kick. And the leg kick was the big X factor in that fight against Blachowicz. We'll see if he's able to stifle the movement of a guy like Prochazka, who is so movement-based. And when you look at the co-main event in Tom Aspinall and you say, this guy's movement's great, he moves side to side, he L-steps out of the way, he's got good boxing fundamentals. Jiri Prochazka learned his fundamentals from books and DVDs.
No, he learned it from standing outside of a Chapters watching those guys at Dance Dance Revolution right across the hallway who were spending all of their paychecks and hours of their time on Dance Dance Revolution.
Those guys, I mean, they would fit in well in 2023, where when you go to like Marshalls or Winners, any of the trifecta, the TJ Maxx stores in Canada, and they have those giant water bottles, they would have been buying those things up. But when you look at this fight, Matt, Pereira, Prochazka opened the favorite. He's the underdog at this point. Pereira now favored to get the win in the fight. And listen, we do this every single time. We throw it on over to you guys. We put it out there in the YouTube community tab. We want to get your thoughts on this fight. Do you think the fans, what way do you think they're going to go?
I think they're going to favor Pereira.
You think they're going to favor Pereira in the fight? He's coming off that split decision win.
It's just been so long for Jiri, right? And I think a lot of people thought he was well on his way to losing that fight against Glover. Now, yes, he was able to pull out the crazy upset, or not upset, but the crazy comeback. But it's a really well-matched fight.
1,200 total votes today, 56% going with Alex Pereira. Read some of your comments here. We got Seth MacArthur saying, Alex hasn't fought anyone like Jiri. Give me the samurai. David Dasher is saying, Jiri has more experience, more ways to get it done. He feels like the obvious choice. Now, I will offer up one caveat. Usually the commenters have the underdogs in these ones. Tamir is saying, if Alex Gas is slightly screwed, if Jiri decides to charge
pretty good cardio,
his chakra and leave his chin open for the lefty, then he's also screwed. That's a really good point there from Tamir. And I'll go with one more. Joe saying, Jiri fights with his hands low and gets cracked all the time. I don't know how people think he has a chance at all. So, Matt, a little bit of real talk there at the end. The Topology votes, they're pretty well the same, going with Pereira over Prochazka. So make sure you hit up the community tab. But Matt, the fans, they have Poetan in this one. Who do you have?
I also have Poetan in this one. I don't feel great about the pick, but this is a take that I have. I think this guy would have been a big underdog, and I would have picked him. I think Jamall Hill would have beat Jiri.
No.
Hear me out. I do. He throws a really high volume, and he does do a really good job of at least staying in range of his opponent. And I just think eventually one of those power shots was going to land against Jiri because he is so hot and cold in terms of he's throwing the craziest thing you've ever seen that lands, and it looks amazing. Or he can be on the back foot and almost look uncomfortable on the feet. So for that reason, and I like what you brought up about the leg kicks too. I do agree with that. I think Alex is going to use some of those leg kicks to make Jiri a more stationary target. The one thing I worry about, though, isn't necessarily the overall grappling out of Jiri. He is the bigger guy in this fight. Like, I don't think Jiri could ever make 185. He's a big dude at 205. So if he is just able to outmuscle Alex in some of the clinch positions and those lead to takedowns, I could easily see him get the win that way. I just think the striking defense is too big of an issue for me to think he's going to win this
To
one.
me, you anticipate, again, this is at sea level, it's in New York City, you would think both guys are going to have good cardio bases, both guys, they work that aspect of their game, and if there's no injuries and everything's created equal, Alex Pereira has that vaporizing power to these two guys, just like the fight that Pavlovich has. I don't have Pavlovich and I don't have Pereira in the fight. I have Prochazka in this one. I think the movement's going to be the difference maker. Now, to where he ate a flush hook on the chin from Volkan Oezdemir and then stood there and kept going like this.
You're not going to be standing there doing this if Alex does that.
I have Jiri Prochazka, and if he wins, you're going to see the wildest Twitter celebration, X celebration that there's ever been. So, Matt, from the Ferris Bueller promo to me picking Prochazka, I'm there and I'm about it. You're going with Alex Poatan Pereira to get the win. Throwing the big time spears out there. But Matt, this is an awesome fight. We look at this card overall. I'll go over here. We look at this card overall. There's a lot of really big time fights. Again, there's 10 total ranked fighters, one debuting fighter in Kevin Borjas. You have some sophomore showings from some big time fighters like Joshua Van, who's in that fight against Borjas, among others. This does feel like one of those big time fight cards, at least to me. Maybe I built it up in my mind. But hopefully the fans like this one because when you have two title fights, even though one's an interim fight, like, it's not like they just have to throw these two together to sell something. These are two big-time fights.
Well, they're both stylistically fun fights that are going to be really entertaining to watch. It's not like they're throwing together two guys so you don't want to see they're in with each other. You have Pereira Prochazka is going to be absolutely insane.
And Aspinall and big-time Pavlovich fight, they were already supposed to fight a couple of years ago. So,
and even like Matt Frevola versus Benoit Saint-Denis is going to be a really fun fight that people aren't talking about. Like, there's a lot of fights on here that I think are going to be extremely competitive and really fun to watch.
So make sure you check those out. Again, apologies for question mark kicks. There was no internet in the area last weekend, but we'll make up for it this weekend so long as people don't steal the copper and the wires. Matt, hopefully they can check it out. That's 2 hours before the prelims here on the channel. You can always find us here at Fight Night Picks, X, Instagram as well. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say,
let's get into it.